Chapter 1816. Nuwa's body wasn't sealed at all. Perhaps it had sensed the presence of Nuwa's soul and other parts of her body. It rushed over on its own accord. At this moment, Nuwa and the Hichu Luoshu became restless and wanted to rush out. However, Moronyu didn't let her out. Instead, he opened the Hichu Luoshu. Although Nuwa was powerful and her body was indestructible in the eyes of the heavens, Nuwa's power was not something that could be destroyed. However, Moronyu couldn't guarantee that Nuwa's soul and other parts of her body had the same ability. Whoosh! Just as the He-Tu in the Book of the Luo opened, Nuwa's physical body rushed into the He-Tu and the Book of the Luo. At the same time, Moronyu rushed in as well. Then, the Hichu Luoshu closed. The eye of heaven turned pitch black once again. After all, the previous light was from Nuwa's body. Rumble! As Nuwa's body rushed into the Hichu Luoshu, her soul, head, and limbs began to tremble violently. Then, they all turned into streams of light and rushed toward each other. After an earth-shattering boom, the body and soul that had been separated for a long time finally merged back together, perfectly fitting together. At the same time, a powerful and vast aura erupted from Nuwa's body and swept in all directions. 8-star Supreme. 9-star Supreme. Titled Supreme. In the blink of an eye, Nuwa's strength had recovered to the level of a titled Supreme. After reaching this level, her aura was still rising. It seemed like she was about to break through to the titled Supreme level. Moronyu was shocked. Is Nuwa going to break through to the sovereign realm? Of course, this was impossible. There could only be one sovereign in the holy world. The current sovereign of the holy world was heaven. Unless heaven fell, Nuwa would only be able to ascend to the throne. However, even if heaven died, Nuwa wouldn't be able to become a sovereign. After all, one of the basic requirements to become a sovereign was to be recognized by the origin of the holy world. Strictly speaking, heaven wasn't a true sovereign. He was a fake sovereign. After all, he hadn't obtained the acknowledgement of all the essences of the sacred world. Even if the ruler died, as long as Moronyu didn't die, no one could become the true ruler. Therefore, when Nuwa's strength increased to the point where she was stronger than the average titled supreme martial artist, she was stuck. Why was it stuck? This was because Moronyu felt that Nuwa's strength still had room for improvement. Perhaps she really could reach the sovereign realm in one fell swoop. However, it was as if an invisible hand was choking it, and it was unable to continue improving. At this moment, Nuwa slowly opened her eyes. A look of disappointment flashed across her eyes. Even Moronyu could sense it. As the person involved, Nuwa's people were even clearer. Morongyu's feeling was right. Nuwa's breakthrough was indeed stuck. This naturally made her unhappy. She also knew why she was stuck. Looking at Moronyu, a cold light flashed in the depths of Nuwa's eyes. However, it disappeared in a flash. Moronyu controlled a portion of the holy world's origin. If she could kill her, seize the holy world's origin, and then hurt heaven in the future, Nuwa could easily become a sovereign. However, let's not talk about whether she could kill Moronyu first. Even if she could kill Moronyu, would she do it? Nuwa didn't think that she was an ingrate. If it wasn't for Moronyu, she would still be suppressed by the supreme martial artist. If heaven had broken through the cycle of reincarnation, she might have been refined. Moronyu was her benefactor. She definitely wouldn't do anything to Moronyu. Moreover, Moronyu was a chaotic celestial. He was someone who would become a chaos controller in the future. Such a person usually had great luck. So how could she have killed him? As for seizing Morongyu's physical body, Nuwa had never thought of such a thing, because she knew that even if those people seized Morongyu's physical body, they wouldn't become a chaos controller. At most, they would only be slightly stronger than ordinary people. A chaotic celestial had to be combined with the chaotic celestial record and the soul born from the chaotic celestial to become a chaos controller. Not a single one could be missing. Therefore, what Nuwa wanted to do was to help Morongyu become a chaos controller. However, with Morongyu's personality, would he treat her badly when the time came? Just look at Morongyu's brothers, and it was clear. Whether it was Li Fengwei or Fan Tong, which one of them wasn't one of the top experts in the holy world? With Li Fengwei's talent, it was impossible for them to have such great achievements in this lifetime. And the reason why they had today was all because of Murong Yu's help. Murong Yu, thank you. Niwa took a step forward, arrived in front of Murong Yu, and bowed to him. Murong Yu smiled and helped Niwa up. He said, "No need to thank me. This is what I should do. Moreover, I didn't save you for no reason. I still need you to help me deal with Supreme, True Marshal, and the others. That's a must. Not to mention Supreme, True Marshal. Even if it's heaven, I'll help you deal with them." When she said this, a cold, killing intent flashed through Niwa's eyes. It wasn't targeted at Supreme, True Marshal. Although she had some friendship with Supreme, True Marshal, it wasn't a deep one. Moreover, there was no conflict between the two. What made her killing intent burst forth was heaven. Back then, she had been suppressed by heaven. If it weren't for the fact that heaven couldn't completely kill her, Niwa wouldn't have existed. Moreover, although heaven couldn't kill her, she had been suppressed for countless eras. If it weren't for Murong Yu's heaven-defying strength, Niwa would still be suppressed. Just help me deal with Supreme, True Marshal, and the others. Leave firmament to me. A glint flashed across Murong Yu's eyes. Even though autarch Niwa was powerful enough, there was still a huge gap between her and heaven. Moreover, there was the origin of the holy world. Unless one was much stronger than heaven, it would be difficult to kill it. At the very least, one had to use the origin of the holy world to balance out heaven's origin of the holy world. Moreover, he and heaven were destined to have a battle of fate. If heaven didn't die, he would die. As time was tight, Murong Yu didn't stay in Hichu Luoshu for long. Soon, he left Hichu Luoshu and appeared in the eye of heaven again. He had to find the other part of the holy world's origin as soon as possible. Whether it was Supreme, True Marshal, and the others or heaven, they could launch a fatal attack on him at any time. Murong Yu had to increase his strength as soon as possible. However, this time, Niwa also came out. Looking at Niwa, who was standing beside him, Murong Yu was speechless. His physical body was still being crazily bombarded by the power of the Heaven's Eye, and it was being destroyed. However, Niwa didn't have any reaction to it. It was as if she was taking a stroll in the park. The strange and terrifying power seemed to treat Niwa as air and didn't attack her. However, Murong Yu was only speechless. He wasn't shocked. After all, he had seen Niwa's physical body shining brightly here. If an incomplete physical body without a soul could do it, how could a complete physical body with a soul not do it? However, he was even more curious about Niwa's origin. Niwa, what is your physique? Or should I say, who are you? Your physique is even more terrifying than mine. Murong Yu asked directly. Niwa shook her head. Murong Yu was a little disappointed. However, he knew that Niwa wasn't hiding it from him. Instead, when he saw Niwa shaking her head, the depths of her eyes were also filled with doubt. Niwa herself didn't know what physique her physical body was. She didn't know the reason at all. She only knew that even Supremes couldn't kill her. Moreover, Niwa's creation of humans wasn't like the legends. When Niwa created humans, she was already a supremacy. At that time, a cultivation world was on the verge of destruction for some reason. All living beings were dead. At that time, it was Niwa who used her great ability to revive some people who weren't completely dead. The method she used to revive those people was seen by those who had been revived before. Then, those people spread the rumor that Niwa was the one who created humans and taught them how to cultivate. In reality, Niwa only revived a few people. That's right, Niwa had the great ability to revive people. However, this ability could only revive those who were much lower than her by many realms. For example, Murong Yu and even ordinary Supremes, she couldn't revive them. This made Murong Yu feel that it was a pity. If Niwa could revive him, then he would be equivalent to a person who is truly immortal and indestructible. In that case, he would definitely be able to kill the heavens. Niwa rolled her eyes. I need to consume my blood essence to revive someone. The more powerful I am, the more blood essence I need to consume. If I want to revive you, I'm afraid I won't be able to do so, even if I use up all my blood essence. Morongyu smiled sheepishly. However, he suddenly stopped. They continued to talk as they advanced. At this moment, they had already traveled an unknown distance. Nuwa, hurry up and shine, he suddenly said. Nuwa suddenly stumbled and almost fell. What do you mean by shine? Let your body shine and light up this place. Hurry up, I need it urgently. Morongyu became excited. This was because he could sense that the other part of the sacred realm's essence was nearby. However, this place was pitch black and he couldn't see anything. He couldn't be sure. As for using energy to condense fireballs, Morongyu had already tried this when he entered the Heaven's Eye. The energy he released was instantly shattered. How could it possibly light up this part of the sky? Upon hearing Morongyu's excited and anxious voice, Nuwa felt a little strange. However, she still made her body shine with a dazzling light. In the next instant, a boulder the size of a small mountain appeared in Morongyu's field of vision. The fluctuations of the sacred realm's essence that he could sense were coming from this small mountain. In other words, a portion of the sacred realm's essence was hidden within this boulder. In other words, this boulder itself was the sacred realm's essence. Chapter 1817. Whoosh! Morongyu reached out his hand and grabbed at the boulder. Bang! However, after a loud bang, the hand he extended was shattered into pieces. They were in the depths of the Heaven's Eye. Terrifying pressure constantly pressed down on them from all directions. Not to mention Morongyu's hand. Even his body, which had reached the level of a supreme weapon, was constantly crumbling under the pressure. Morongyu rolled his eyes, speechless. However, he would never give up on the source of the holy world. Therefore, with a single thought, he sent out the Hichu Luo Shu. The He-Tu and the Luo Shu expanded in the blink of an eye and became like a mountain suspended in the air above the boulder. Rays of earthy yellow holy light continuously fell from the Hichu Luo Shu and enveloped the boulder. Keep it! Morongyu roared in his heart. Plop! The Hichu Luo Shu shook violently, and the earthy yellow holy light vibrated violently. However, the boulder beneath it did not move at all. It was as if it had been embedded in the void of the Heaven's Eye and could not be moved. Morongyu rolled his eyes. He could not even keep the Hichu Luo Shu. Then he could only refine it directly. Therefore, he took large strides forward and was about to walk towards the boulder. However, he was stopped by Supreme Nuwa. Morongyu, what is that? Is that what you have been looking for all this time? Supreme Nuwa asked curiously as she looked at the ordinary-looking boulder. The boulder was just too ordinary. There was nothing special about it at all. If there was anything special about it, it would be that the boulder was so hard that it was not destroyed by the Heaven's Eye. However, apart from that, what else was special about it? However, Morongyu seemed determined to get it. Could it be some kind of treasure? Nuwa could not link the boulder to any kind of treasure. That is a treasure. Morongyu did not stop. As he explained to Nuwa, he had already appeared beside the boulder. The pressure was the same. An incomparably terrifying pressure continued to batter the boulder, but the boulder remained motionless and was not damaged at all. This made him feel surprised. This was because he knew that the heavenly eyes did not belong to the origin of the saint's world. Here, the origin of the sacred world would be suppressed or even annihilated. Therefore, he didn't dare to let the old sage come out. That would be a disaster. The entire boulder is the origin of the saint's world. However, his consciousness had already fallen asleep. On top of that, the origin energy of the holy world also possesses the power of the heavenly eye, capable of devouring and tearing everything apart. As soon as Morongyu approached the boulder, the old sage's voice rang out in his head. Don't ask how the old sage knew. They were originally one, so he only needed to feel a little to know the general situation of the other. Morongyu nodded and immediately sat down cross-legged to start refining. However, the consciousness of the origin of the sacred world had already fallen asleep. It was unable to communicate with Morongyu at all. On the other hand, the origin of the saint's world possessed some of the characteristics of the heavenly eye. This made it much more difficult for Morongyu to refine. However, No matter what, Murong Yu would not give up. Seeing Murong Yu begin refining the boulder without saying anything, Sovereign Nuwa rolled her eyes. She had already walked around the boulder no less than 10 times. However, she still couldn't find anything special about the boulder. While Murong Yu was refining the origin of the Saint's world in the Saint's world, under the combined efforts of Supreme, True Martial, and the other titled Supremes, the primordial world was completely presented before them. So that's the primordial world? Supreme, True Martial, and the others stood in the endless void. They looked at the huge sphere that was emitting a faint fluorescent light and laughed out loud. Under the cover of the faint light, it was an incomparably huge sphere. A vicissitude and primordial aura emanated from it. It was extremely vast. A cold light flashed through Supreme Ash Wolf's eyes. That must be the primordial world. It's hidden very well. Everyone, if we don't attack now, when will we? Supreme, True Martial, and the others looked at each other and nodded. Then, the 8 titled Supremes attacked at the same time, unleashing a terrifying power towards the primordial world. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the attacks of the 8 titled Supremes landed on the primordial world. How terrifying were the 8 titled Supremes' strength! They were one of the strongest people in the Saints' world apart from the Sovereigns. They attacked together. The entire primordial world trembled violently from the attacks. Beams of holy light continued to erupt from the immemorial world, rushing into the sky. When the primordial world was attacked, pooh, pooh, pooh. Even though Murong Yu had already prepared himself to be attacked before he left, he still didn't know what to do. However, even though he was prepared, it did not mean that Shenzhen and the others had the ability to withstand the combined attacks of the 8 titled Supremes. In fact, even Murong Yu did not expect the 8 titled Supremes to shamelessly attack the primordial world together. A gentleman like Murong Yu would never have thought of such a despicable and shameless thing. Murong Yu still underestimated the shamelessness of Supreme, True Martial, and the others. Therefore, some of the weaker disciples of Shenzhen did not even have time to react before they were shattered by the terrifying shockwave. They turned into a bloody mist and disappeared from the world. Enemy attack. Shenzhen and the others were already prepared. This attack came very suddenly and killed many of Shenzhen's low-level disciples. However, all of Shenzhen's disciples reacted quickly. Protective Mountain Array. Teleportation Array. Under the command of Li Ling and the others, the primordial world's protective mountain array was immediately activated. Then, many holy veins that contained terrifying power were ignited. The primordial world's protective mountain array was activated. However, even so, Li Ling and the others were not at ease. They had already started to organize Shenzhen's disciples to retreat back to the realm of the gods, although everyone was rather orderly and did not panic. However, all of Shenzhen's disciples were angry and aggrieved. What made them angry was that they knew who had attacked them. They were the elites among the Supremes, titled Supremes. Although there were a few Supremes in Shenzhen's disciples, they were only ordinary 1-star Supremes. With their abilities, they could not fight against Supreme, True Martial, and the others. The most powerful experts were attacking them. This naturally made Shenzhen's disciples extremely angry. They also felt aggrieved because they could not fight back. These old bastards, once the Holy Lord breaks through to the Supremes, he will definitely kill them all. In Shenzhen's disciples, an elite on the Holy ranking roared angrily. Yes, when the Holy Lord returns, it will be the time for them to die. Another Shenzhen's disciple roared angrily. As he roared, his eyes flickered with anticipation. They all knew that Murong Yu had gone to increase his strength. They had absolute confidence in Murong Yu. In their hearts, Murong Yu is the ruler who could kill everything. I'm looking forward to the Holy Lord's return. When the time comes, our Shenzhen will become the true ruler of the holy world. Those so-called Supremes will all be killed. Shenzhen's disciples roared angrily. At the same time, they quickly teleported back to the holy world through the teleportation formation. They saw that the primordial world only trembled violently and the holy light flickered, but it was not destroyed. Not only did Supreme, True Marshal, and the others feel incomparably shocked by this, but they were also shocked by this. However, soon, their faces darkened. They were all titled Supremes, the most powerful beings in the holy world other than the rulers. Even with 8 of them working together, they were still unable to destroy the primordial world, although they did not use their full strength and only wanted to destroy the primordial world's barrier. However, this was simply too humiliating. One had to know that ordinary independent spaces could not withstand a casual attack from them and would be destroyed. Oof. Shuetao let out a cold snort and threw out a punch. A huge blood-red fist tore through billions of space-time and destroyed everything. It carried with it a terrifying aura that could destroy heaven and earth as it slammed into the primordial world. Boom! The primordial world shook violently as beams of holy light shot into the sky, illuminating billions of miles of space. Everyone in the primordial world was shaken by the terrifying power of the tremors. However, because of the protective mountain formation, no one was killed this time. However, if the other party continued to attack, the protective mountain formation would not be able to hold on for long. Therefore, many of the teleportation formations in the primordial world began to operate frantically. One by one, the disciples of Shenzhen were sent back to the holy world through these teleportation formations. Otherwise, if the primordial world was destroyed, they would either be killed or captured. It would be fine if they were killed, but if they were captured, they did not want to be a burden to Murongyu. Supreme Shuetao's expression was a little ugly. His attack could not do anything to the primordial world. Everyone, our goal is to capture everyone from Shenzhen, not kill them. Therefore, we do not need to destroy the primordial world. We only need to open up a path to enter it, Supreme Luosha said indifferently. Supreme True Marshal and the others nodded slightly and immediately flew toward the primordial world. You guys are too shameless. Titled Supremes are joining forces to deal with a faction of the holy world that does not even have a supremacy? At this moment, a furious roar came from behind them. Before the voice had even finished speaking, a figure broke through the void and shot over from afar, quickly appearing in front of Supreme, True Marshal, and the others. Supreme Wushuang, what is the meaning of this? Supreme True Marshal was the first to be displeased. He looked at Supreme Wushuang with hostility. The newcomer was none other than Supreme Wushuang. After Murong Yu and Nuwa entered the Heaven's Eye, she had returned to the holy world. However, when she returned, she discovered the shameless actions of Supreme, True Marshal, and the others. She could not help but be filled with righteous indignation. Why are you wasting time with her? Just kill her. Supreme Tsang Lang's eyes flashed with cold, killing intent. He attacked first, clawing at Supreme Wushuang in an attempt to kill her. Chapter 1818. Supreme Peerless harumphed coldly and pointed his finger forward. Boom! The attacks from both sides collided violently in the void, and then both of them dissipated in the void. After all, it was just a probing attack, so it was a draw. However, Sovereign Song Lang's eyes were filled with killing intent. He took a step forward and swiped at Supremacy Peerless with his claws. The human race, the sacred race, and a monster race had always been at odds. Even titled Supremes were the same. The conflicts between the races. For example, Sovereign Song Lang wanted to kill the Supremes of the human race and the sacred race all the time. However, compared to the human race's titled Supremes, he wanted to kill the sacred race's titled Supremes more. After all, the monster race had too many titled Supremes. There were 5 of them, which was more than the human race and the monster race combined. However, if there was a chance, Sovereign Song Lang wouldn't give up on killing the human race's titled Supremes. Just like now, Autark Peerless was clearly on bad terms with them, which gave him an opportunity to make a move openly. Boom! As Sovereign Song Lang clawed at Supreme Peerless, an enormous river of blood appeared in the air. It carried a terrifying aura that could destroy the world as it tore through the air and charged at Supreme Peerless, intending to kill her in one fell swoop. This was a great opportunity. Supreme, Peerless frowned, her heart burning with rage. However, she wasn't afraid at all. She unleashed her strongest attack at the two strongest titled Supremes of the monster race. If it was just the two of them, she was confident that even if she couldn't defeat them, it wouldn't be easy for them to defeat her either. Defeating her would be easy, but killing her wouldn't be easy. However, protecting Shenzhen was something she had promised Muronyu. Now that Murongyu's fate was unknown, she didn't want to see a ground full of corpses when Muronyu returned. Putting her promise aside, the fact that the 8 titled Supremes had joined forces to attack Shenzhen was enough to infuriate her. Shameless. They were too shameless. However, Autark Peerless had underestimated their shamelessness. After the River of Blood appeared, the 5 titled experts of the sacred race also made their moves after Sovereign Shui, Tao, had made his move. Only Supreme, True Marshal, who was also a human, stood still with a slight frown on his face. He didn't make a move, but he didn't stop him either. Of course, if Song Lang and the others were to deal with Wu Shuang in the past, he would definitely intervene. But now, he would make a move. This was because Paragon Peerless had blocked his path as well. It was already extremely benevolent of him not to make a move. 7 titled Supreme Martial Artists joined forces to attack. Even though the attack hadn't arrived yet, the pressure on Supremacy Peerless had already skyrocketed, and his scalp had turned numb. It was true that titled Supreme Martial Artists were powerful, but they were not invincible. Perhaps 2 or 3 titled Supreme Martial Artists would find it difficult to kill another titled Supreme Martial Artist of the same realm. But what about more people? The 7 of them were more than enough to kill Autark Wu Shuang. Supreme Peerless immediately summoned the Unparalleled Palace to protect himself. At the same time, her strongest attack enveloped Song Lang and blasted towards him. Rumble, the power of the two sides collided violently in the void. Terrifying shockwaves that shook the entire Saints world erupted. Even though Supremacy Peerless was powerful, she was still alone. Her attack was only able to block for a moment before it was blasted apart. On the other hand, Song Lang and the others had only used up a small portion of their attack. The rest of their attacks continued to surge towards her. With a bang, Unparalleled Palace was sent flying out. Wah! Supreme Peerless spat out a mouthful of blood. As she spat out blood, she was horrified. In a flash, she had already retreated. However, Song Lang and the other titled Supreme Martial Artists were determined to kill Supremacy Peerless. How could they allow her to escape so easily? Where do you think you're going? With a furious roar, the 7 Supreme Martial Artists unleashed their ultimate saint techniques. Holy light of all colors instantly filled the void. The terrifying power squeezed the nearby void, causing large patches of it to shatter. Supremacy Peerless was shocked. She still unleashed her strongest attack. However, how could she be a match for Song Lang and the other titled Supreme Martial Artists? While exchanging blows, she was simply being suppressed. For a moment, terrifying waves of energy bombarded her body, causing her to spit out blood. After a while, Supremacy Peerless aura weakened. This was because she had been severely injured. Her strength was almost depleted. If not for the fact that she was a titled Supreme and had a strong physical body, she would have been killed long ago. However, if she couldn't fight her way out, she might very well die today. She would be the first titled Supreme to die in countless years. 7 people against 1, and you still can't kill her? You guys are really trash. At this moment, a cold voice sounded. The speaker was Supreme Martial Artist. He was currently looking at Song Lang and the others with disdain. Song Lang and the other titled Supreme Martial Artists were furious. However, their faces were burning. Although they had been mocked by Supreme Martial Artists, it was true. The 7 of them had been fighting for half a day, but they still couldn't kill Supremacy Peerless. They were indeed trash. Supremacy Peerless, you shouldn't have appeared here today. No matter who it is, anyone who stands in my way is my enemy. I will kill them one by one. You're no exception. Supreme Martial Artist looked at Supremacy Peerless coldly. As he spoke, Supreme Martial Artist took a step forward and slapped his hand towards Supremacy Peerless. Supremacy Peerless had already been suppressed to the point where he couldn't even catch his breath. However, Supreme Martial Artist's individual combat strength was stronger than Supremacy Tsang and the others. As a result, Supremacy Peerless couldn't block at all. She was slapped down by Supreme Martial Artist. A part of her body was smashed. Holy blood splattered in all directions, shattering the surrounding space. As for Supremacy Peerless, he was sent flying as well. Of course, she could have borrowed the force of the attack to fly out. Peerless, surrender. You won't be able to escape today. Supreme Martial Artist sneered. He took a step forward and charged towards Supremacy Peerless. Supremacy Tsang and the other titled supremacies were also filled with murderous intent. They attacked madly. After killing Supremacy Peerless, the human race only had one titled supremacy left. The threat to them was greatly reduced. They were no match for them. Supremacy Peerless' heart was enveloped by an intense aura of death. She might not even be able to save her own life, let alone Shengzhen. As a result, she could only defend and flee at the same time. However, the strength of Supreme, True Martial, and the other 8 Great Supremes was too terrifying. Supremacy Peerless had nowhere to run. It didn't take long for her to be heavily injured and surrounded. Surrender. Bloody light erupted from Supremacy Shui Tao's body. He looked extremely terrifying. On the other side, the 5 supremacies of the Sacred Clan were also overjoyed. Even if I die today, I'll drag 1 or 2 of you down with me. Supremacy Peerless was furious. Under the encirclement of the 8 titled supremacies, there was no way she could escape. Thus, she decided to fight with her life on the line. You don't have a chance. Supreme Martial Artist took a step forward and reached out to grab Supremacy Peerless. At the same time, the other 7 supremacies also unleashed their strongest attacks. They wanted to kill Supremacy Peerless in a single blow. Supremacy Peerless' face was filled with determination. At the same time, her aura began to rise rapidly. In just a short while, her aura had surpassed that of any titled supremacy present. This crazy woman, even if she wants to commit suicide, she shouldn't drag us down with her. She's self-detonating. Supremacy Tsang was shocked. Without another word, his figure flashed, and he took a step forward, intending to flee into the distance. At the same time, the other titled supremacies did the same. They wanted to flee as well. They had forced Supremacy Peerless into a corner and were about to kill her. However, that was when the 8 of them had joined forces. The self-detonation of a titled supremacy was the most terrifying thing. If they didn't flee, they would be wiped out in one fell swoop. All the titled supremacies in the holy world would die in an instant. As a result, even Supreme Martial Artist was shocked. After one of them slapped Supremacy Peerless, they were about to flee. Peerless, tomorrow will be even better. Why do you have to commit suicide? A calm voice sounded from afar. At the same time, a huge hand tore through space and appeared near Supremacy Peerless at lightning speed. Then it slapped Supremacy Peerless. It was so fast that Supremacy Peerless didn't even have time to react. By the time she did, the huge hand had already grabbed her. At the same time, an incomparably powerful force that even Supremacy Peerless couldn't resist enveloped her body. Boom! Crack, crack. Supremacy Peerless, who had been forcefully raising her cultivation, had her aura severed. Someone had forcefully interrupted Supremacy Peerless self-detonation. This wasn't the self-detonation of an ordinary saint. This was the self-detonation of a titled supremacy. One had to know that even Supreme Martial Artist and the other 7 titled supremacies couldn't stop Supremacy Peerless self-detonation. This person hadn't even appeared, but he'd managed to interrupt it with a single hand? Who was this person? How could his strength be so terrifying? Could it be that heaven had returned? Supreme Martial Artist and the other titled supremacies were almost scared to death. The first thing they thought of was that heaven had returned. Only a ruler could have such strength. However, that voice didn't belong to a ruler. Why are you in such a hurry to leave? All of you stay. That voice sounded again. Along with it, a huge hand that enveloped the entire area appeared. The huge hand unleashed a terrifying force that swept through everything. It enveloped Supreme Martial Artist and the other titled supremacies and slapped them down. At the same time, a figure appeared in front of Supreme Martial Artist and the others. It was a black-robed youth. Moronyu. Someone among the 8 titled Supreme Martial Artists exclaimed in surprise. Chapter 1819. The newcomer was Moronyu, and the one who had attacked was also Moronyu. However, the terrifying aura that Moronyu was emitting made Supreme, True Martial, and the others shudder. Powerful. He was simply too powerful. The person who had interrupted Supreme, Master Wushuang's self-detonation was also Moronyu. From this, it could be seen that Moronyu was much more powerful than Supreme, True Martial, and the others. Right now, Moronyu is stronger than any of the Supreme, True Martial Saint and the others. However, even so, Supreme True Martial and the others were only shocked for a moment. Then, they flew into a rage. Although Moronyu was powerful, he was simply too arrogant. Even if he was more powerful than any of them, he still wanted to kill them with one slap. That was simply wishful thinking. Therefore, Supreme True Martial and the others stopped in their tracks, even though they were furious. They had not retreated because of Moronyu, but because they were afraid of Supreme Master Wushuang's self-detonation. Now that Supreme Master Wushuang's self-detonation had been interrupted, what was there to be afraid of? Moreover, Moronyu was still their target. As long as they could obtain Moronyu's physical body, they would not even be afraid of the Sovereign of the Heavens. Would they not dare to attack, just because Moronyu was more powerful than them? That was impossible. Moronyu might be more powerful than any one of them, but how could he be their opponent when they joined forces? Rumble. Instantly, the 8 titled Supreme True Martial released their strongest attacks, directly attacking Moronyu's huge hand. Seeing that they had attacked, Moronyu's eyes flashed with disdain. He was the only one who knew his own strength. Only he knew how powerful he was. Yes, he was very powerful. Without any changes, Moronyu's huge hand slapped down. In the blink of an eye, the attacks from both sides collided violently in the void. Bang! Following a loud explosion, the strongest attacks of Supreme True Martial and the others exploded one after another. On the other hand, Moronyu's attack had only dissipated a little, and his attack had only paused for a moment. Following that, Moronyu's illusory hand continued to slap downwards. Supreme True Martial and the rest of the 8 titled Supreme Martial Artists were shocked. While feeling shocked, he quickly retreated. However, even though they were fast, Moronyu was even faster. Bang! A terrifyingly powerful force slammed into the bodies of Supreme True Martial and the others. At this moment, Sovereign Jinwu and the others felt as if they had been struck by an enormous sacred mountain. Puff! Supreme Jinwu and the other titled Supreme Martial Artists spat out mouthfuls of blood at the same time. Their expressions instantly became dispirited. At the same time, they were violently sent flying. At this moment, the 8 titled Supreme Martial Artists were horrified. Moronyu was so powerful that he could injure 8 titled Supreme Martial Artists with a single slap? Moronyu is only a 2-star Supreme Martial Artist. That's right, Moronyu is only a 2-star Supreme Martial Artist. After injuring Supreme True Martial and the others with a single slap, Moronyu took a step forward and arrived beside Supreme Martial Artist Wushuang, who had a shocked expression on his face. Before Moronyu entered the Heaven's Eye, she was with Moronyu. When Moronyu broke through to the Supreme Martial Artist realm, she was also by his side. She knew that Moronyu was powerful, but wasn't Moronyu too powerful now? He could defeat 8 Supreme Martial Artists with a single slap? Perhaps only the Heaven Dominator had such power. Are you alright? Moronyu asked with concern. Supreme Martial Artist Wushuang had been forced to self-destruct in order to protect Shenzhen. Although Moronyu didn't comment on Supreme Martial Artist Wushuang's actions, he had helped him after all. Supreme Martial Artist Wushuang was still a little shocked. He only nodded slightly without saying anything. After sending out a stream of life energy to heal Supreme Martial Artist Wu Shuang's injured body, Murong looked at Supreme True Martial and the others. At this moment, Supreme True Martial and the others had already gathered together. They all looked at Murong with cold eyes, filled with murderous intent. From today onwards, there will only be 2 titled Supreme Martial Artists in the Holy World. The 8 of you can die now. As he spoke, Murong took a step forward and slowly walked towards Supreme True Martial and the others. The faces of Supreme True Martial and the others changed. However, they soon began to laugh. Murong could injure them. He was very powerful. But as titled Supreme Martial Artists, how could they be killed so easily? It would be very difficult for Murong to kill them. Everyone, this brat has appeared. Whether or not we can obtain the chaotic celestial body depends on us. Everyone can see that this brat's strength has increased too quickly. Let's not talk about how to split the spoils after killing Murong for now. Today we must kill this brat. If we let him continue to grow, even if the 8 of us join forces, we won't be his match. Supreme True Martial glanced at Song Lang and the other titled Supreme Martial and said in a low voice, "That's right. Today we must use our strongest attacks to kill this brat. We can't let him ride on our heads." Supreme Phoenix also said in a low voice. His eyes were filled with murderous intent as he looked at Murong. Murong had almost annihilated the Phoenix clan. This naturally made him, the ancestor of the Phoenix clan, extremely angry. As for Murong, who had caught up from behind and was even stronger than them, they couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Moreover, Murong was only a 2-star Supreme Martial Artist now. At this level, he was stronger than them. What if he reached the 3-star, 4-star, or even higher realms? At that time, he could probably kill them with just a thought. The fact that there was a firmament above them in the holy world already made them unhappy. They definitely wouldn't allow Murong to ride on their heads and shit on them. Are you worthy? Hearing their words, Murong didn't make a move. He only sneered. His face was full of disdain. Supreme True Martial and the others were furious. Their murderous intent towards Murong intensified. Kill! Supreme Song Lang was the first to make a move. He roared. A wolf claw comparable to a supreme artifact tore through space and time with a whoosh and grabbed at Murong. Supreme Song Lang didn't have a supreme artifact. His wolf claw was his supreme artifact. Its power was terrifying. When Supreme Song Lang made his move, Supreme Phoenix, Supreme True Martial, and the others also made their moves. In an instant, an incomparably terrifying power filled the entire void. With them, as the center, the terrifying power swept out in all directions. It was vast and mighty, tearing everything apart. Large areas of the void were annihilated. Good timing. Murong's battle intent exploded and soared into the sky. He took a step forward and smashed through the endless void. His entire body turned into a stream of light and pounced at Song Lang. I heard that your claw is your supreme artifact. I'd like to see if your claw or my fist is stronger. Murong said coldly. His fist, which was bursting with black holy light, directly punched at Song Lang's claw. You're courting death. Supreme Song Lang sneered in his heart. So what if Murong was strong? So what if his physical body was strong? How could it compare to his claw? One must know that even Supreme True Martial and the others didn't dare to fight him head-on. His claws had once torn apart a 9-star Supreme Being's supreme weapon. One could only imagine how terrifying his claw was. Seeing this, Supreme True Martial and the others sneered in their hearts. They clearly knew how terrifying Song Lang's claw was. In their opinion, Murong was simply courting death. Be careful. Song Lang's claw is not only tough and sharp, but it's also poisonous. Even a titled Supreme would be poisoned. Supreme Wu Shuang's voice sounded, his voice filled with anxiety. However, Murong didn't seem to care as he continued to attack. Reverend Ash Wolf laughed. In his mind, he could already picture the scene of Murong being clawed to death by him. Poison Murong to death. Poisoning Murong Yu was the best way because only he could decipher his own poison. Therefore, after killing Murong Yu, it would be useless even if Supreme True Martial and the others took away Murong Yu's physical body. Bang! In the blink of an eye, Murong Yu's fist had already collided with Supreme Songlang's claw. At this moment, it was as if time had stopped. In an instant, an earth-shattering sound was heard, and a figure was sent flying like a shooting star. The pupils of Supreme True Martial and the others constricted. They clearly saw that the person who had been sent flying was Supreme Songlang. The claw that Supreme Songlang had always been proud of had already been shattered. Streams of sage blood dripped down continuously, piercing through the void. Murong Yu had clearly not used any Supreme artifact, yet he had shattered Supreme Songlang's claw with just a fist. Supreme Songlang's claw was an extremely powerful Supreme artifact. Your claw is only SOSO. Die now. Murong Yu sneered disdainfully. He took a step forward and avoided the attacks of Supreme True Martial and the others. He locked on his Supreme Songlang and attacked. Supreme Songlang was both shocked and enraged. He looked at Murong Yu from afar, his face full of hatred. Murong Yu, you must die today. As he spoke, Supreme Songlang charged forward once more. It didn't matter that he had lost a claw, he still had another one. He had only been careless just now. This time, he would definitely be able to kill Murong Yu. Restrain Murong Yu for me, even if it's just for an instant. I'll poison him to death. Supreme Songlang transmitted to Supreme True Martial. At the same time, he was ready to attack. The expressions of Supreme True Martial and the others changed slightly. They had heard that Supreme Songlang had been researching a type of poison for a long time. That poison was something Supreme Songlang had used to deal with sovereigns. Since he dared to use it against sovereigns, it meant that there was a chance it could poison sovereigns to death. At the very least, it could injure Supremes. Now that he was using it to poison Murong Yu, although Murong Yu was powerful, he was still far from being a sovereign. Thus, he would definitely die. Thus, Supreme True Martial and the others changed from attacking to controlling. They wanted to cooperate with Supreme Songlang to kill Murong Yu. Chapter 1820. With a swoosh, Murong Yu was bound by Supreme True Martial and the others and stopped in the void. Die! Sovereign Songlang roared. With a flash of his body, he arrived near Murong Yu. At the same time, he slapped his claws at Murong Yu. Suddenly, a large amount of black fog erupted from his claws and enveloped Murong Yu. Murong Yu, just wait for your death. Sovereign Songlang quickly retreated. At the same time, Supreme True Martial and the others did the same. Songlang, what kind of poison is this? Seeing the void being corroded by the black fog, Supreme True Martial and the others couldn't help but change their expressions. The world's #1 poison. It's a poison that I spent countless eras to extract from the outer realm's chaos. Even the heavens can't resist it. I call it the ruler's poison. Sovereign Songlang sneered but didn't go into detail. Although he was about to kill Murong Yu, Supreme True Martial and the others already knew about his trump card. However, they didn't know the specifics. In the future, Sovereign Songlang could use it to kill any of them. The black fog seemed to have a mind of its own. After enveloping Murong Yu, it rushed into Murong Yu's body with a swoosh. It was so fast that even Murong Yu couldn't block in time. This showed how powerful the poison was. After the poison entered Murong Yu's body, it didn't stay in his body. Instead, it turned into a poisonous current and rushed toward his soul. It was obvious that the poison wasn't targeted at his physical body. Instead, it was targeted at Murong Yu's soul. It was because of this that Songlang was willing to kill Murong Yu without worry. After all, they cared about Murong Yu's physical body. It would be better if he didn't have a soul. Murong Yu still stood in place without moving. Wasn't he still restrained by Supreme True Martial and the others? In fact, Supreme True Martial and the others had only caused Murong Yu's body to slow down slightly. However, the 8 Great Supremes cooperated extremely well with each other. That was why the Ash Wolf Supremes were able to poison them so easily. Humph! Murong-Yu couldn't help but snort coldly when he saw the poisonous torrent rushing into his spiritual space. With a thought, Murong-Yu's sea of soul began to churn violently. Enormous soul powers condensed and transformed into huge torrents that shot towards the toxic torrent. Boom! In the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, the torrent of souls had already collided with the torrent of toxins, erupting into an earth-shattering explosion. Of course, this loud noise only came from Murong-Yu's body. From the outside world's point of view, Murong-Yu's body only shook slightly. Huh! Murong-Yu let out a cry of surprise. This was because he discovered that not only was his spiritual strength unable to shatter the toxic torrent, but his spiritual strength was also unable to shatter it. On the contrary, a portion of his soul powers was directly corroded. At this moment, the toxic torrent of toxins continued to rush towards Murong-Yu's spiritual space. Murong-Yu's expression turned serious. In the next moment, an enormous amount of chaotic energy had already filled his spiritual space. If his soul powers couldn't destroy the toxins, then what about his cultivation powers? Soon, he had an answer. His cultivation powers couldn't destroy the toxins either. Instead, they were corroded just like his soul powers. This toxic torrent of toxins was truly terrifying. Murong-Yu, don't waste your energy. This poison can even kill a ruler, let alone you. Ash Wolf's disdainful voice came from afar. Supreme True Marshal and the others saw Ash Wolf Supreme's confident expression. Unknowingly, they had already distanced themselves from Ash Wolf Supremes. This guy was simply too dangerous. If they were careless and got poisoned by him, they would definitely die. In fact, Supreme True Marshal and the others even wanted to kill Ash Wolf Supremes. After all, their strength was originally on par with each other. Just like True Martial Supremacy, he could defeat any other titled Supremacy. However, it would be difficult to kill them. However, if Ash Wolf poisoned them, they wouldn't even know how they died. The power of faith. Murong-Yu's expression turned gloomy. His chaotic energy and soul powers couldn't destroy the toxins. They couldn't even destroy a portion of the toxins. This made his heart feel heavy. Therefore, he could only use the power of faith to attack. Boom! At this stage, the power of faith was indeed powerful. After attacking, a portion of the toxins was immediately destroyed. However, a lot of the power of faith was also consumed, killing 1,000 enemies at the cost of 800 of his own. However, even if the power of faith was gone, there would still be more. However, if he died, there would be no more. Therefore, Murong-Yu circulated the power of faith with all his might and attacked the toxic torrent. Murong-Yu suddenly hesitated. This was because he suddenly realized that the toxins were so terrifying. Did this mean that the toxins contained an extremely terrifying power? If it was power, would the Chaos Furnace be able to refine it? Although Murong-Yu had reached the level of a 2-star supremacy, he was still a long way from becoming a dominator. As long as it was power, he needed it. Therefore, Murong-Yu didn't hesitate anymore. He activated the Chaos Furnace and swallowed the toxic torrent. Chaos Furnace, refine it all. Murong-Yu roared in his heart. He activated the Chaos Furnace with all his might and started to refine the toxic torrent. However, to prevent any accidents, Murong-Yu also activated the power of faith and enveloped the entire Chaos Furnace. If the Chaos Furnace couldn't refine the toxins, the power of faith could eliminate the toxic torrent in time. However, Murong-Yu's worries were obviously unnecessary. The Chaos Furnace was omnipotent. It could refine everything. Although the toxic torrent was of a very high level, it had extremely terrifying corrosive power. The refining speed was fast, but it could still be refined in the end. The furnace of chaos began to tremble violently. Every time it trembled, a part of the toxic torrent was refined. After refining it, the poison was transformed into the most primitive form of energy that continuously surged into Murong-Yu's body. Murong-Yu's power immediately started to increase. In the beginning, the increase in Murong-Yu's strength was minuscule. However, as time passed, the increase in Murong Yu's strength grew more and more. Song Lang, why isn't Murong Yu dead yet? It had been a while, but Murong Yu was still standing in the same place. He didn't look like he was poisoned at all. Supremacy, True Martial, and the others couldn't hold it in anymore. They all looked at Supremacy Song Lang suspiciously. Supremacy Song Lang's face instantly darkened. He had said that he could even kill a Dominator. But now, even Murong Yu couldn't kill him. Wasn't that slapping himself in the face? Maybe he's already dead. He's just maintaining this position, Song Lang said indifferently. His words were too far-fetched. Rather than saying it to Supremacy, True Martial, and the others, he might as well say it to himself. After all, the toxic poison only targeted the soul. However, Murong Yu's life force was still very strong. How did he look like he was already dead? Perhaps because he didn't believe his own words. Supremacy Song Lang snorted coldly. Then, he took a step forward and shot toward Murong Yu. Supremacy, True Martial, and the others were shocked. Without saying anything, they also took a step forward and followed Supremacy Song Lang. They didn't want Supremacy Song Lang to snatch Murong Yu away. Whoosh! Whoosh! Seeing Supremacy, True Martial, and the others chase after him, Song Lang was extremely unhappy. Wait until I get Murong Yu's body. I'll poison you bastards to death one by one. However, that was just a thought. Right now, Murong Yu was the most important thing. Hence, with a wave of his claws, streams of black poisonous fog had already enveloped Murong Yu once again. The amount of poisonous fog was twice as much as before. If Murong Yu didn't die even after this, Supremacy Song Lang would have nothing to say. Seeing even more toxic torrents rush into his body, Murong Yu's face couldn't help but darken. He could only mobilize the primal chaos furnace to swallow it all. The original toxic torrents hadn't been completely refined yet. After swallowing even more toxic torrents, the primal chaos furnace almost exploded. However, under the crazy refining of the primal chaos furnace, the toxic torrents were quickly reduced. In order to prevent Supremacy Song Lang from poisoning him again, Murong Yu released a trace of toxic torrents from the primal chaos furnace and let it invade his soul. Immediately, Murong Yu's soul was infected by the toxic torrents. In that split second, Murong Yu's complexion and his entire body darkened. This was a sign of being poisoned. Seeing this, Utmost Exalt Ashwolf smiled. At the same time, he retreated. He knew that the toxic torrents were invading Murong Yu's soul. Previously, he hadn't been able to kill Murong Yu because Murong Yu was killing the toxic torrents. This time, Murong Yu would definitely die. What he needed to do now was to snatch Murong Yu's body as soon as Murong Yu died. Thinking about how he was about to become a primal chaos controller, Supremacy Song Lang couldn't help but smile. At the same time, he had already prepared a large amount of Ruler's poison between his claws. As long as Supremacy True Martial and the others dared to snatch Murong Yu's body from him, he would poison them all to death without hesitation. Supremacy, True Martial, and the others naturally retreated. After distancing themselves from Supremacy Song Lang, each of them shrouded Murong Yu with their divine senses. They raised their strength to the limit and prepared to attack. However, although Murong Yu's face was black from the poison, he still stood on the spot without moving. Although his life aura was weakening, the speed at which it was weakening was too slow. At this rate, Murong Yu might not die within 10 years. Of course, 10 years was no different from an instant to them. Thus, they continued to wait. At this moment, Murong Yu was secretly laughing. He didn't know what Supremacy Song Lang's toxic torrents were, but they contained great power. Right now, Murong Yu needed an enormous amount of power. However, after refining the toxic torrents, his power was increasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Chapter 1821. However, although Murong Yu's strength was increasing, the amount of energy he needed was simply too much. However, the amount of energy he needed was simply too terrifying. It was difficult for him to break through to the 3-star Supreme realm. However, wasn't there Ash Wolf Supreme now? Thus, after Morongyu refined the toxic torrent, he gradually made the phenomenon that he deliberately showed Ash Wolf Supreme and the others disappear. Why isn't he dead yet? It seems like he's detoxifying the poison. Seeing that the black gas on Murongyu's face was getting less and less, True Martial Supreme and the others looked at Ash Wolf Supreme with doubtful eyes again. Ash Wolf Supreme was also depressed. Wasn't Morongyu too strong? He still wasn't dead? And he still hadn't detoxified the poison? I want to see if you can really detoxify the poison. Ash Wolf Supreme was furious. With a black face, he charged toward Morongyu again. In the next moment, a large mass of black fog enveloped Morongyu again. Like a raging wave, a huge torrent rushed into Murongyu's body again. This idiot! Morongyu couldn't help but laugh in his heart. However, the more idiotic Ash Wolf Supreme was, the less he would be. The more idiotic he was, the more Morongyu's strength would increase. Thus, Morongyu continued to refine the toxic torrent without batting an eyelid. At the same time, he also did some superficial things for Ash Wolf Supreme to see. When he was almost done refining, Ash Wolf Supreme added more poison to Murongyu's body with a black face. As this cycle continued, Morongyu's strength unknowingly increased by a lot. However, Morongyu felt that it was a pity that although he had swallowed a large amount of toxic torrent, his strength didn't carry the toxic energy. Otherwise, with the strength of the toxic energy, ordinary Supremes would be poisoned to death just by smelling it. However, Morongyu only felt that it was a pity. After all, he had never needed to use poison. This guy had used the pink death to trick people many times before. Bastard! After using the poison again, Ash Wolf Supreme couldn't help but curse in his heart. His face also darkened, because he had run out of poison. Of course, he wouldn't say it out loud. Without these poisons, Supreme, True Martial, and the others wouldn't have any misgivings about him. He needed to use these poisons to intimidate Supreme, True Martial, and the others. It was just that Morongyu was unable to poison him to death from beginning to end. Instead, he suppressed Sovereign Ash Wolf. He knew how terrifying these poisons were. Back then, when he was refining, he had accidentally come into contact with a trace of poisonous fog. However, he had to cultivate his race for an era before he was able to expel it. But Morongyu, is his strength really that heaven-defying? Sovereign Ash Wolf was shocked. He looked at Morongyu with eyes that flickered with a terrifying killing intent. That's right, he was jealous. Do any of you feel that something is wrong? True Martial Supreme sent a voice transmission to the other titled Supremes apart from Ash Wolf Supreme. Ash Wolf's poison isn't reliable. I think Morongyu is completely fine. Why don't we just take him down? Phoenix Supreme sent a voice transmission. At first, they were still frightened by Ash Wolf Supreme's poison. But now, it seemed that it was useless. Attack! The few of them looked at each other. Then, they opened their big hands and directly grabbed at Morongyu. At the same time, Ash Wolf Supreme didn't seem to believe in his poison. He also stretched out his wolf claws and slapped at Morongyu. At this moment, his eyes, which had been tightly shut, suddenly opened. 2 rays of light flashed from his eyes and shot up to the 9 heavens. At the same time, an aura stronger than before emitted from Morongyu's body. It was earth-shattering. Ash Wolf, thank you for helping me increase my strength. Morongyu laughed heartily. Not only did he not retreat in the face of the attacks from Honorable True Martial and the others, he even rushed forward and sent a punch out. Ash Wolf Supreme was infuriated. Even a blind person could see that. Morongyu's strength had increased. Why? Wasn't it all because of his poison? Supreme True Martial and the others fiercely glared at Ash Wolf Supreme. Morongyu was already strong enough. Now he was even stronger. Did Ash Wolf Supreme want to kill Morongyu or help him increase his strength? At this moment, Supreme True Martial and the others couldn't help but want to kill Ash Wolf Supreme with a punch. This guy really couldn't do anything right. What they didn't know was that Ash Wolf Supreme was even more depressed. He originally wanted to kill Morongyu with his poison, but he didn't expect that not only did he fail to kill Morongyu, but he also helped Morongyu increase his strength. Morongyu could actually refine the poison. How terrifying was that? Ash Wolf Supreme's eyes were filled with killing intent. But more than that, he was greedy. He attributed all of this to the chaotic, celestial body. He felt that it was because of this body that he couldn't poison Murong Yu to death. On the contrary, he used the poison to increase his strength. Therefore, his desire to seize Murong Yu's body burned even more fiercely. In truth, if he could think this way, Supreme, True Marshal, and the others would also think this way. Kill! Murong Yu bellowed as he threw a punch at her. Rumble. After an earth-shattering explosion, a terrifying force suddenly erupted. Immediately, Supreme, True Marshal, and the others were sent flying as if they had been hit by several primordial sacred mountains. In fact, in the process, they were even vomiting blood violently. They were no match for Murong Yu. Now that Murong Yu had become stronger, they were even less of a match for him. How dare you target me, Shengzhen? You deserve to die. All of you must die. Murong Yu's expression was indifferent and his voice was cold. As he spoke, he punched out once again. Boom. 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 Supreme, True Marshal, and the others couldn't block it at all. They were sent flying by Murong Yu's punch and were injured again. However, Murong Yu couldn't kill all 8 of them with one punch. After all, they were titled Supreme, True Marshal. It was easy to defeat them, but difficult to kill them. However, they had to be killed. After all, they had wanted to kill Murong Yu for a long time. Murong Yu would never allow those who wanted to kill him to continue living, unless he didn't have the strength to kill them. Moreover, even if Murong Yu didn't kill them, the heavens would kill them when they returned. Instead of being killed by the heavens, it was better for him to kill them. Moreover, Murong Yu could refine their bodies to increase his strength. Everyone, let's work together to kill this bastard. Supreme Being True Marshal was enraged as he was repeatedly sent flying by Murong Yu. This made him feel endless humiliation. He hadn't been treated like this for countless years. Supreme Grey Wolf and the others nodded and attacked Murong Yu again. Murong Yu wasn't afraid. On the contrary, he laughed loudly. You will all be killed by me in the end. Supreme Grey Wolf, in order to thank you, I will definitely kill you first today. As he spoke, Murong Yu took a step in the air and passed through endless time and space, pouncing towards Supreme Grey Wolf. Supreme Grey Wolf was furious and murderous. Murong Yu, I admit that you are strong, but if you want to kill me, you are dreaming. As he spoke, Supreme Grey Wolf unleashed a terrifying power and attacked Murong Yu crazily. Is that so? Murong Yu smiled coldly and didn't say anything else. He couldn't be bothered to talk to these dead people. He used the army word technique and disappeared from the spot with a whoosh. When he reappeared, he was already in front of Supreme Grey Wolf. As for Murong Yu, he had already stretched out his hand and grabbed at Ash Wolf. Shock flashed past Supreme Grey Wolf's eyes. Murong Yu was too fast. With a thought, Supreme Grey Wolf was about to retreat. At the same time, he slammed his claw at Murong Yu. Domain, suppress for me. Murong Yu shouted angrily in his heart. A large part of the power of the domain suppressed Supreme Grey Wolf. The reason why Murong Yu was so strong was because he had refined 3/9 of the Holy World source energy. Otherwise, no matter how strong he was, it would be difficult for him to suppress Supreme, True Marshal, and the other titled Supremes with a single punch. Plop. Under the suppression of the power of the domain, Supreme Grey Wolf was suppressed to the point that he seemed to have lost the ability to fly. He fell down. Holy Soul slash. Murong Yu's figure dashed forward as a saint's soul slash came crashing down with incomparable ferocity. At this moment, Supreme Grey Wolf was suppressed by the domain and had lost the ability to fight back. How could he block the soul attack? Therefore, Murong Yu's soul attack went straight in and hit Supreme Grey Wolf's soul. An 8-star soul with the power of faith. What could Ash Wolf use to defend against it? With a PU sound, Supreme Grey Wolf's soul was shattered. Rumble. Just as Supreme Grey Wolf's soul was shattered, a heaven and earth avatar appeared. Blood clouds and blood rain covered the entire holy world. Moreover, These heaven and earth avatars were many times more serious than before. After all, this was the death of a titled supremacy. Supreme Grey Wolf had died. When Supreme, True Marshal, and the other titled Supremes saw the heaven and earth avatar appear, they were shocked. Even their attacks toward Murong-Yu stopped. Murong-Yu could kill titled Supremes in an instant. He could also kill them in an instant. His strength was actually this strong. Whoosh! At the same time, they unleashed their strongest attacks toward Murong-Yu. At the same time, as if they had discussed it, they turned around and flew in different directions. They actually fled without a fight. Today, none of you can escape. With a thought, Murong-Yu kept Supreme Grey Wolf's body and spatial treasure into the Hichu Luo Shu. At the same time, he opened up his domain and covered the entire area. Today, he was going to start a massacre and kill all these titled Supremes. As the domain descended, Supreme True Marshal was suppressed to the point that he could not move. The incomparably powerful pressure was crazily suppressing their power, trying to restrict their power. At the same time, Murong-Yu attacked again. Locking onto the Phoenix Sovereign, he sent a fierce punch flying towards her. Chapter 1822. Phoenix Sovereign's heart was instantly enveloped by an incomparably strong aura of death. In an instant, Phoenix Sovereign was scared half to death. He had seen with his own eyes how Murong-Yu had killed Ash Wolf Sovereign. His strength was about the same as Ash Wolf Sovereign's. In other words, Murong-Yu was absolutely confident that he could kill him in a single blow. Overwhelmed with shock, the Phoenix Sovereign raised her speed to the limit. At the same time, she took out her supreme artifact and unleashed her strongest attack toward Murong-Yu. As a supreme being, especially a titled supreme being, every single one of them was extremely talented and confident. Even in the face of death, they would definitely not sit still and wait for it. Therefore, even though Murong-Yu was strong and Phoenix Sovereign was shocked, he still attacked Murong-Yu. He didn't just run away, because attacking was the best defense. "You will definitely die today," Murong-Yu sneered in his heart. Taking a step forward, his figure flashed and dodged the opponent's attack. At the same time, his soul attack was also incomparably fierce. Domain Power, Suppression, Holy Soul Slash. The Holy Soul Slash mixed with the power of faith was definitely Murong-Yu's strongest single-target soul attack. Under the suppression of the Domain Power, Phoenix Sovereign's fate would definitely be the same as Ash Wolf's. He would definitely die. As expected, when Murong-Yu's Domain Power crazily suppressed him, Phoenix Sovereign's body suddenly turned sluggish. Like Ash Wolf Sovereign, his body fell straight down. At this moment, Phoenix Sovereign finally understood why Ash Wolf Sovereign couldn't block Murong-Yu's attack at that moment. It was because he was the same. At this moment, it seemed like his strength was being suppressed. Phoenix Sovereign roared in his heart, because he knew that even if he was only suppressed for an instant, it was enough for Murong-Yu to kill him millions of times. Break for me. Under the incomparably terrifying suppression, Phoenix Sovereign roared in his heart, wanting to break through the suppression of the Domain Power. However, he was currently suppressed by 1/3 of the Holy World. Could a mere titled sovereign like him resist the suppression of 1/3 of the Holy World? No. The aura of death in Phoenix Sovereign's heart grew stronger and stronger. The dense aura of death was so oppressive that he could barely breathe. In fact, Phoenix Sovereign could already see Murong-Yu's soul force transforming into a warblade that was slashing towards her with incomparable ferocity, about to slay her soul. At this moment, Phoenix Sovereign's soul began to tremble violently. He even had a strong urge to escape from the soul space. Murong-Yu had a look of contempt on his face. It was not difficult for him to kill a titled supreme martial artist. The Phoenix Sovereign was dead for sure. The Phoenix Sovereign was about to be killed by Murong-Yu. But at this moment, an incomparably terrifying pressure came crashing down from the sky. A monstrous hand that contained a terrifying aura that could destroy the heavens and earth suddenly grabbed down. In the blink of an eye, the giant hand had already slammed into Murong Yu's domain. Bang! After an earth-shattering explosion, Murong Yu was caught off guard. The domain that was condensed from the holy world's origin energy was directly hit by the giant hand. A huge force exploded, and a crack sound was heard. Murong Yu's domain was smashed apart. At the same time, the gigantic hand made a grabbing motion in the air, directly grabbing towards the Phoenix Sovereign. With a bang, Murong Yu was sent flying. The strength of that force was the strongest aura that Murong Yu had ever seen. It was extremely terrifying. It could easily kill a titled supreme martial artist. Even the current Murong Yu was not a match for that person. Because Murong Yu had suddenly been sent flying, his soul attack had naturally deviated from its original trajectory and couldn't kill the Phoenix Sovereign. Instead, it flew past Phoenix Sovereign, causing her to break out in cold sweat. After all, the Phoenix Sovereign was also a titled supremacy, so she had already seized this opportunity to retreat. However, at this moment, the giant hand that suddenly appeared had already flipped over. With his swoosh, Phoenix Sovereign did not even have time to react before her neck was grabbed by the giant hand. It was like grabbing a little chick. At this moment, everyone, including Murong Yu, was stunned. He grabbed Phoenix Sovereign by the neck, and Phoenix Sovereign didn't even have time to react. It was like a supreme martial artist grabbing a primal chaos ancestor sage. This was the difference between them. At the same time, 3 words appeared in the minds of Murong Yu and the others. Chang Tian was back. Yes, in the entire holy world, other than Chang Tian, who else had such strength? In other words, other than Chang Tian, who else could break Murong Yu's domain with a single blow? Murong Yu had refined 3 out of 9 of the holy world's origin energy. On the other hand, Chang Tian had refined 4 out of 9 of the holy world's origin energy. In essence, Chang Tian's holy world's origin energy was definitely stronger than Murong Yu's. Indeed, in the next moment, Chang Tian appeared before everyone's eyes. It was also at this moment that Murong Yu saw Chang Tian's true body for the first time. Previously, he had only seen Chang Tian's clone. Murong Yu, you have truly disappointed me. Chang Tian's cold gaze swept across supremacy, true martial, and the others before finally landing on Murong Yu's face. Chang Tian's indifferent gaze contained a hint of passion. Murong Yu was actually a little nervous, even though he appeared calm on the surface. However, in secret, he had already raised his strength and faith to the extreme. If Chang Tian made a move, he would definitely not sit still and wait for death. However, what made Murong Yu a little depressed was that he had not expected to face Chang Tian so early. Although they would have to face off sooner or later, it was still early. But it still seemed a little early. Heaven was back. Did he succeed in breaking through reincarnation, or did he fail? Chang Tian, you have also disappointed me. Murong Yu looked at Chang Tian without fear. However, supremacy true martial and the others staggered and almost fell down. Chang Tian was the strongest person in the holy world. Murong Yu actually dared to speak to Chang Tian like that? What about them? They had long since stopped talking. Because of the huge difference in strength, they did not dare to speak. Very good, let's fight. It's best if both sides are injured. Supremacy, Xue Tao, and the others cursed in their hearts. Whether it was Murong Yu or Chang Tian, they were both stronger than them. They were the 2 ancient sacred mountains that floated above their heads. They were not willing to be enveloped by their light and struggle at death's door. This was because if either of these 2 gods was unhappy, they could kill them. Under the illumination of their light, they were no different from ordinary saints. Chang Tian's eyes flashed with a cold light when he heard this. A terrifying killing intent erupted from his body like a storm, sweeping in all directions. However, it was quickly restrained. It was just a flash. Murong Yu, you destroyed my power clone, the palace, and the Chang Tian mountain range. You even saved Niwa. Do you know that every single one of these crimes is punishable by death? Heaven looked at Murong Yu and questioned him. Although he was questioning him, his voice was cold and emotionless. Pooh! Supremacy, true martial, and the others immediately spat out. They knew that Murong was strong, but did he have to be so strong? He actually destroyed Chang Tian's everything when Chang Tian was not around. Murong strength should have increased because of this, right? He must have eaten or refined some treasure from Chang Tian to have his current strength. Thinking of this, supremacy, true marshal, and the others secretly regretted. If they took the opportunity to destroy Chang Tian's headquarters, would they be as strong as Murong? They might even surpass Murong and be on par with Chang Tian. However, what they did not know was that if they were in Chang Tian's place, not only would their strength not increase like Murong, they would have been killed long ago. Murong laughed. Isn't my increase in strength what you want to see the most? Isn't it what you want now? Chang Tian laughed as well. However, there was a terrifying killing intent deep in his eyes. That's right. Now, you barely qualify to be possessed by me. A supremacy level body is enough to contain my soul. I guess you won't dare to make a move now. Murong looked at Chang Tian with a smile. He was not afraid at all. It was as if he was having a heart-to-heart talk with a friend. The killing intent in Chang Tian's eyes grew stronger, and his pupils shrank. Murong's rise shocked him. In particular, Murong had already refined 3/9 of the Holy World's origin energy. Although his Holy World's origin energy was stronger than Murong's, he could not suppress him. Moreover, Murong could see through his situation. The more it was like this, the more Chang Tian did not dare to make a move. Ha ha ha! Chang Tian laughed and said, Murong, I hope you can reach the 9-star supremacy level as soon as possible. When that time comes, I will possess your body. I hope you won't disappoint me this time. As for them, although they are a little useless, they are very important in the Holy World. Therefore, I don't want you to kill them. As he spoke, he had already tossed Phoenix Sovereign out. Then, he disappeared on the spot. What are you waiting for? His voice was like a flood. Supremacy, true marshal, and the others' faces changed slightly. After exchanging glances with each other, they finally unfolded their bodies and chased after the sky. Whoosh! Whoosh! Wushuang and Yuhua instantly appeared by Murong's side. Murong, why didn't Chang Tian make a move on you? Supremacy Wushuang asked Murong with lingering fear. Just now, she was truly afraid that the heavens would slap her and Murong to death. After all, she was also responsible for destroying Chang Tian's base. Because he didn't dare to, Murong's eyes flashed, and he said with a smile. Wushuang and Yuhua looked at Murong in confusion. Chang Tian must have failed to break through reincarnation and is severely injured. Murong said calmly. His eyes flashed with terrifying, killing intent. Chapter 1823. Chang Tian had failed to break through reincarnation. He was severely injured. Wushuang and Yuhua looked at Murong in disbelief. Their faces were filled with doubt. Didn't they say that there were only 2 outcomes for breaking through reincarnation? One was to succeed in breaking through reincarnation and be able to leave the Holy World and travel the universe. The other was to fail in breaking through reincarnation and die. Usually, only 1 out of billions of experts could successfully break through reincarnation. As for the others, they would all die. However, Chang Tian had failed in breaking through reincarnation, but he didn't die. It wasn't that Yuhua and Wushuang didn't believe Murong. It was just that it was too shocking. Murong nodded. Although Chang Tian had exploded with strength that was many times stronger than his, that should have been his strongest attack. Although Chang Tian had concealed it well, and no one else had noticed it. However, Murong could feel that the aura in Chang Tian's body was extremely chaotic. It was a situation where he was severely injured. Murong guessed that Towering wouldn't be able to unleash any more attacks just now. Otherwise, why didn't Chang Tian attack Murong? Even if he didn't possess Murong on the spot, he would have captured Murong. If that's the case, why didn't you take the opportunity to kill Chang Tian? Wushuang looked at Murong and asked in confusion. Murong shook his head. That was the best opportunity. However, he didn't attack. Why? If Chang Tian could be killed so easily, he would have attacked long ago. He could vaguely guess that Song Tian had something else up his sleeve. If he attacked, he might not be able to kill Song Tian, or he might only be able to severely injure him. However, he would definitely die. As the strongest expert in the holy world, you wouldn't believe that Song Tian didn't have any trump cards up his sleeves. What should we do next? Wait for Song Tian to recover his strength? Once Song Tian recovers his strength, he will definitely attack us, Nuwa said with a frown. After seeing Song Tian, she didn't feel too good. I'll try my best to increase my strength. If I don't put my life on the line, it won't be easy for the heavens to kill me, Yu said indifferently. As he spoke, he took a step forward and prepared to enter the primeval world. But at this moment, extremely suddenly, clouds of blood and rain appeared, enveloping the entire saint's world. The might of this worldly anomaly was exactly the same as when Yu had killed the Ash Wolf Sovereign. It was much more intense than when an ordinary sovereign had fallen. A titled supreme martial artist had fallen. Yu stopped and exchanged glances with Nuwa and Wu Shuang. Then, he saw the confusion in each other's eyes. Aside from the two titled sovereigns, there was only Sovereign Jin Wu and the others in the saint's world. However, hadn't Supreme True Martial and the others left with heaven? Why did someone else die? Could he have been killed by the heavens? This thought flashed through Yu's mind. This thought wasn't impossible. After all, heaven was too heavily injured. It was highly possible that he had killed a titled supreme martial artist and devoured their energy to heal his own injuries. However, after this thought appeared, Yu's face darkened. Of course, he didn't pity those titled supreme martial artists. Even if those titled supreme martial artists weren't killed by heaven, they would be killed by Yu in the end. Yu was worried that if heaven killed the titled supreme martial artist to heal his own injuries, then his injuries would be healed in a short period of time. At that time, it would be a disaster for Yu. However, Yu didn't have any other choice. There wasn't any item that contained a large amount of energy for him to refine. As for the remaining origin energy of the saint's world, there wasn't even a trace of it. He could only counter soldiers with arms and water with an earth weir. Yu brought Wu Shuang and Nuwa back to the primeval world. At this moment, the primeval world was already empty. Most of the people had already retreated back to the divine world. Therefore, it didn't matter if Yu came back later. Even a supreme martial artist and the rest controlled the primeval world, they couldn't control many of Shenzhen's disciples. However, while supreme martial artists and the rest were easy to deal with, heaven wasn't. With heaven's ability, even if Shenzhen's people hid in the mortal world, he could still destroy the entire mortal world with a single thought. Shenzhen wouldn't be able to avoid it. Only by increasing his own cultivation could he fight against heaven. However, how could he increase his own cultivation? On the second day after Yu returned to the primeval world, heaven's order came down. All the titled supreme martial artists were to rush back to the Heaven Mountain Range within a day. This Heaven Mountain Range was formed by heaven's divine ability after he returned. Those who missed the deadline would be killed without mercy. When this news spread throughout the saint's world, all the titled supreme martial artists took action and rushed back to the extraterrestrial world as fast as they could. They didn't dare to disobey heaven's order. Otherwise, they would be killed by heaven. However, they weren't willing to return to the extraterrestrial world. This was because they vaguely knew their fates. Legend had it that when heaven returned from the reincarnation cycle, he killed a supreme martial artist with the title of Supreme Martial Artist. The one he killed was Supreme Martial Artist Phoenix. That unlucky Supreme Martial Artist. Back then, in Heaven's palace, under the gaze of Supreme Martial Artist and the rest, Heaven killed Supreme Martial Artist Phoenix. Then, he swallowed and refined Supreme Martial Artist Phoenix. Supreme Martial Artist and the rest, who had always been strong, were shocked and furious when they saw this scene. However, none of them dared to make sound. Facing the heavens, they all felt powerless. As long as heaven wanted, they would be killed. They didn't even have the thought of resisting. It was really lamentable. It was said that there was only one reason why heaven summoned these supreme martial artists back to the extraterrestrial world. He wanted to kill them and swallow them to heal himself. Because heaven failed to break through the reincarnation cycle, he was heavily injured. He wanted to recover his injured body by swallowing them. The supreme martial artists were naturally shocked and furious. However, under the might of heaven, those supreme martial artists obediently returned to the extraterrestrial world. They were afraid that they would be killed by heaven. Only Murong Yu, Shenzhen's supreme martial artists, and Wushuang and Niuhua didn't return to the extraterrestrial world. Since the outcome was death, why didn't they fight a great battle with heaven before dying? Why did they die in such a cowardly manner? If he could devour all of these supreme being powerful beings, the injuries of heaven might be able to recover. When that time came, he would definitely attack Murong Yu. This gave Murong Yu a lot of pressure. Therefore, he didn't stay in the primordial world. Instead, he started to travel in the holy world. He wanted to find more items that contained great power and the holy world's source. However, although the holy world was big, there were too few items that contained great power. Along the way, Murong Yu encountered a few, but the power was still too little. After refining the Ash Wolf Supreme Martial Artist's supreme weapon and his body, Murong Yu's strength was stuck at the peak of a 2-star Supreme Martial Artist. He couldn't take the final step to become a 3-star Supreme Martial Artist. As for the source of the holy world, he didn't even see its shadow. Old sage, you really can't sense the remaining source of the holy world? Murong Yu asked the old sage in his heart. Right now, Murong Yu had already circulated the source of the holy world to the maximum. It covered a third of the entire holy world. In no time at all, Murong Yu had already traveled through a third of the holy world. However, he still didn't find anything. The remaining 2 sources of the holy world could be in the extraterrestrial world, or in the god world or immortal world. The old sage was helpless. He couldn't sense the other source of the holy world, god world or immortal world. These places had long been under Murong Yu's control. There were no items that contained a huge amount of power. This was certain. However, Murong Yu didn't know whether there was a source of the holy world or not. After all, once the source of the holy world was hidden, even if he held it in his hand, he wouldn't be able to tell that it was the source of the holy world. Thus, Murong Yu suppressed his cultivation and returned to the god world, immortal world, and even the mortal world. However, he still couldn't find the source of the holy world. Then, there was only one place left. It was the extraterrestrial world. If there wasn't any source of the holy world in the extraterrestrial world, Murong Yu suspected that the shattered source of the holy world had rushed out of the holy world and appeared in the endless starry sky. Thus, Murong Yu entered the extraterrestrial world again. After a round of searching, he almost searched the entire extraterrestrial world. However, he still didn't find anything. Old sage, the remaining 2 sources of the holy world couldn't have really rushed out of the extraterrestrial world, right? Murong Yu had a bad feeling. Without the source of the holy world, and without an item containing a huge amount of energy for him to refine, how could he fight against the heavens? Do I have to refine the weapon fragment? Murong Yu took out the weapon fragment and took a look. The weapon fragment didn't look any different from when he first saw it. Murong Yu could naturally sense how terrifying the energy contained in the weapon fragment was. Once he refined it, he might be able to raise his cultivation to the level of a 9-star Supreme. However, he didn't think he had the ability to refine the weapon fragment. It's impossible to rush out of the extraterrestrial world. Now, there's only one possibility. The remaining 2 sources of the holy world might have been suppressed by the heavens. The old sage's voice sounded in Murong Yu's mind. Murong Yu rolled his eyes. You can't be asking me to snatch the 2 sources of the holy world from the heavens, right? If I had the strength, why would I need the source of the holy world? I'll just kill the heavens. Snatching and stealing are 2 completely different concepts. The old sage said indifferently. Murong Yu rolled his eyes, but in the end, he still flew towards the Heaven Mountain range. Now, this was the only way. Boom! While flying towards the Heaven Mountain range, Murong Yu's body violently trembled. Following that, a massive wave of faith power poured into his body through the air like an ocean. The power of faith energy skyrocketed once again. The holy world is unified again. A smile appeared on Murong-Yu's face. At the same time that he left the primeval world, Shenzhen made his move again. With Sun Feiyong and the others' strength as sovereigns, the sacred sect was able to easily unify the saints' world once again without any sovereigns. Chapter 1824. After unifying the holy world, Shenzhen built more statues of Murong-Yu in the holy world. The more statues there were, the more power of faith Murong-Yu received. Originally, there were many sages in the holy world who were Murong-Yu's followers. However, after heaven went to transcend reincarnation, those supremes returned. Using their great magic, they had forcefully changed the faith of many saints. Now, they only recovered their faith. Therefore, Murong-Yu's power of faith increased by many times. Although Murong-Yu was stronger, there was still a huge gap between him and heaven. Therefore, Murong-Yu still wanted to seize the source of the holy world. Soon, Murong-Yu appeared outside the Sangtian mountain range. The current Sangtian mountain range was built on top of the original Sangtian mountain range. However, the scale was much smaller than the original Sangtian mountain range. After all, the original Sangtian mountain range was formed by heaven after countless years. Now, it was just a rough formation. Rumble, just as Murong-Yu appeared outside the Sangtian mountain range, the heaven and earth vision appeared again. It wasn't someone who became a Supremes, but a Supremes who died. It wasn't a titled Supremes, but an ordinary titled Supremes. In fact, Murong-Yu had already guessed that this fallen supreme being was most likely slain by the heavens. However, this had nothing to do with Murong-Yu. With a thought, Murong-Yu became invisible. Then, he took a step forward and rushed into the Sangtian mountain range. He was careful. He had no choice. Murong-Yu was going to steal the source of the holy world that might be suppressed by heaven. He couldn't let heaven find out in advance. Rumble. During this process, the heaven and earth vision appeared one after another. Murong-Yu did a rough count. In just half a day, the number of Supremes that had died had reached 10. Moreover, they were all high-level Supremes. Of course, those titled Supremes weren't killed. This confirmed heaven's guess that heaven was killing Supremes and using their power to recover from his injuries. However, heaven's continuous killing of Supremes was actually very useful to Murong-Yu. By now, the news of the Supremes and ruler had spread throughout the holy world. Even the sage-to-be knew how cruel and merciless heaven was. He slaughtered those Supremes like they were chickens and ducks just to heal his injuries. What if heaven couldn't recover after killing all the Supremes? If that was the case, would he sacrifice the entire saints' world to heal him? All sorts of guesses were made, and the sovereign was viewed as an unpardonable villain. On the other hand, Murong-Yu was a great hero for bravely opposing the ruler. In comparison, more people became Murong-Yu's believers, allowing him to obtain even more power of faith. Murong-Yu's strength had grown even stronger. Very soon, Murong-Yu entered the depths of heaven's mountain range. He didn't see heaven. Instead, he saw the Supremes who were supposed to be high and mighty. However, those Supremes weren't in a good state. Each and every one of them had their strength sealed, and they were all locked up in the various halls. Murong-Yu couldn't help but feel sad for them. As one of the most powerful experts in the holy world, they were like pigs that had been reared. They were trapped and waiting to be slaughtered. At this moment, heaven no longer continued to kill supreme beings. Or perhaps it needed time to refine them after killing a certain number of them. Murong-Yu didn't care about these suppressed supremes. What did they have to do with him? Murong-Yu walked past them and arrived outside Heaven's palace. Originally, Heaven's palace had been devoured by Murong-Yu. It was a half-true ruler's weapon. Although this palace looked exactly the same as before, it was just an ordinary Supreme's weapon. There were still hundreds of millions of formations and restrictions outside the palace. However, these couldn't stop Murong-Yu at all. He shuttled through the formations and restrictions as if he was in a place where no one could stop him. These formations and restrictions still couldn't stop Murong-yu. Very soon, Murong-yu entered the palace. At this moment, Murong-yu was even more careful. At the same time, he had raised his strength to the maximum. The moment he was discovered by heaven, he would unleash his strongest attack. However, it was obvious that Murong-yu was being overly careful. At this moment, heaven was sitting cross-legged on the throne. He raised his head and looked at the side of the hall. Near the throne, there were dozens of skeletons that had lost their luster. Murong-yu knew that those skeletons should be the skeletons of the Supremes that were killed by heaven. Normally, even if the Supremes were dead, their skeletons would be filled with five-colored radiance. No matter how much time passed, they wouldn't change. But these Supremes who were killed by the firmament, because their powers were completely devoured by the firmament, they became like mortals. Under the erosion of time, they would turn into ashes very quickly. Dull sounds that sounded like beans being fried kept coming out from heaven's body. However, although this guy was healing himself, he was looking at the other side attentively. What was he looking at so intently? Murong-yu was puzzled. He followed heaven's gaze and looked over. Boom! When Murong-yu saw what heaven was looking at, his entire body couldn't help but tremble. What was heaven looking at? He was looking at an ancient word. That ancient word was completely different from the words in the Holy World. However, Murong-yu could still recognize the word with a single glance. That was because that word was the same as the 9 symbolic words that Murong-yu had cultivated. It was the last word of the 9 symbolic words, Qian. Lin Bing Doja Jie Zhen Lai Zai Qian. Other than the Qian formula, Murong-yu had already cultivated the other 8 ancient words. During this period of time, Murong-yu had been searching for the source of the holy world and items that contained a huge amount of energy. At the same time, he was also searching for the last word of the 9 symbolic words. However, there was no news at all. Legend had it that if one could gather all the 9 symbolic words, they would have unimaginable abilities and achievements. Now, the last word had appeared in front of him. As long as he comprehended this word, Murong-yu would have learned all the 9 symbolic words. It turned out that the Qian formula that Murong-yu couldn't find for a long time had already been taken by heaven. Murong-yu heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, he couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. If heaven had fallen in the process of breaking through reincarnation, then the Qian formula would have disappeared in the endless chaos along with heaven's fall. It was probably impossible for Murong-yu to gather all of it. We must get our hands on it. Murong-yu's face was resolute. He was very curious about the huge changes and surprises that would occur after the 9 symbolic words were gathered. However, how would he get the Qian formula? Although the Qian formula was floating below the wall of the palace, there were hundreds of millions of formations and restrictions placed on it. Once the Qian formula was touched, those formations and restrictions would be triggered. Once there was any movement, heaven would definitely react and take action immediately. Although Murong-yu had the ability to protect himself, it was impossible for him to get the Qian formula from heaven. If he couldn't get it this time, then there wouldn't be another chance. Even the source of the holy world couldn't be stolen. Forcefully taking this path wouldn't work. Murong-yu gritted his teeth. Now, there was only one choice left. Cultivate. That's right. He wanted to cultivate in heaven's palace. As long as he succeeded in cultivating the Qian formula, he would be able to leave. Even if he was killed by heaven, he would still have a chance to be revived. He could do it. Murong-yu immediately sat cross-legged in the void and began to comprehend the Qian formula. However, although he was invisible, he was more careful than before. Therefore, heaven was also comprehending the Qian formula. His divine thought covered the entire Qian word. Murong-yu's divine thought didn't dare to touch it at all. If he accidentally touched heaven's divine thought, he would be discovered by heaven. By then, Murong-yu would definitely be in for a tragedy. Therefore, Murong-yu didn't extend his divine thought. Instead, he just looked at the Qian formula and comprehended it. Murong-yu had already obtained the 8 words of the 9 symbolic words. Therefore, Murong-yu was determined to get this word. Moreover, He wasn't worried that heaven would be the first to comprehend it. Not long after, heaven, who had been comprehending the Qian formula, suddenly opened his eyes. Then, he reached out his hand and grabbed the void. In the next moment, more than 10 Supremes who were at the advanced stage were caught by heaven and brought into the palace. These Supremes were terrified. After entering the palace, they all started to beg for mercy. Some of them even knelt on the ground and kowtowed to heaven in an attempt to get heaven to let them go. However, in the eyes of heaven, they were just pigs that heaven reared. How could heaven let them go? Therefore, heaven swallowed all of them coldly. The damage that Heaven's sky had suffered was simply too severe. The best way to heal was to devour these extremely strong sovereigns. Their immense power was part of the reason. Another reason was their cultivation comprehension. Murongyu chose to turn a blind eye to this with an indifferent expression. These Supremes didn't deserve sympathy, even if they were Supremes of the human race. These Supremes had wanted to kill Murongyu and Shangzhen. They were Murongyu's enemies. Even if heaven didn't kill them, Murongyu would kill them sooner or later. However, Murongyu felt that it was a pity. If he could kill these supreme beings and refine them, his strength would be able to break through to a 3-star supreme being or even a 4-star supreme being. As time passed, Murongyu's comprehension deepened. He had already formed a connection with the Qian formula. And in this process, at least hundreds of supreme beings were slain by the firmament. This made Murongyu's heart ache. On this day, Murongyu, who was comprehending the Qian formula, suddenly opened his eyes. It's done. At the same time, the Qian word, which had been calm all this while, suddenly exploded with a blinding light. Chapter 1825. Chang Tian had always been there. He was either devouring the sovereign's power to heal his injuries or comprehending the forwarding formula. The forwarding formula was discovered by Chang Tian during the process of breaking through reincarnation. Chang Tian didn't know what the ancient word meant. However, he knew that the ancient word was extraordinary from the first time he saw it. Therefore, although he didn't know what it was, he still used his divine power to imprison it and suppress it in his body. Later on, when he was breaking through reincarnation, he studied the forwarding formula. Although he didn't make much progress, he more or less gained something, especially when he failed to break through the reincarnation cycle. The ancient character erupted with a terrifying power and saved him. It was because of the ancient word that he managed to keep his life even though he failed to break through reincarnation. If it wasn't for the ancient word, Chang Tian would have died long ago and he wouldn't have just been severely injured. Because of this, the heavens knew even more about the preciousness of this ancient character. Therefore, when he was healing himself, he was comprehending the ancient word. When he met Murongyu, Chang Tian really wanted to kill Murongyu and take over Murongyu's body. This was because Murongyu's strength had caused him to feel apprehensive. Murongyu had already refined 1/3 of the holy world's origin source. He was almost on par with Chang Tian. Chang Tian was severely injured, and he would need a long time to recover to his peak. By then, Murongyu's power would probably be above his. However, his soul wasn't in the right state to take over. However, if it was in the past, he would definitely kill Murongyu. Even if he couldn't take over, he would seal Murongyu's body first. However, Chang Tian did make a move. Why was this so? Because of the forwarding formula. Chang Tian could feel that if he could comprehend the forwarding formula, his power would definitely skyrocket. Not to mention killing Murongyu. He was confident that he could even break through reincarnation. Therefore, he didn't make a move on Murongyu. But now, the ancient character was suddenly emitting such an intense light. One had to understand that ever since he obtained the ancient character and failed to break through the cycle of reincarnation, the ancient character erupted with a ball of dazzling light and power that wrapped around him, protecting his life. During the rest of the time, there was nothing strange about the ancient characters. What was going on? Heaven was sure that the ancient word did not change because of him. But what was the cause of this abnormality? Soon, Heaven knew what the reason was. The ancient characters that were originally suppressed by him on the wall broke out a dazzling light. Then they broke free from the restraint of his hundreds of millions of arrays and enchantments and flew straight up. Heaven was shocked and reached out to grab the ancient character. However, the speed of the ancient characters was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, it had already passed his hand and rushed to the other side of the palace. Bang! The ancient characters seemed to have collided with something, and a dull, loud sound was heard. Then, a figure appeared in Heaven's sight. Murongyu. When he saw Murongyu, who was sitting cross-legged in the void, Heaven couldn't help but roar angrily. It wasn't only because Murongyu had dared to barge into his palace, but also because the ancient character had rushed into Murongyu's body. This was like snatching food from a tiger's mouth. Heaven was shocked and furious. He roared and reached out his hand. He unleashed his most powerful attack and attacked Murongyu. Murderous intent filled the air. He had to kill Murongyu today. However, at this moment, an extremely vast and powerful aura suddenly erupted from Murongyu's body. With a bang, Murongyu's body shook violently. In the next moment, Heaven saw 9 different ancient characters erupt from Murongyu's body. In the end, it formed a circle around Murongyu and began to slowly rotate. Each of the ancient characters gave off a dazzling light. An ancient and powerful aura erupted continuously and shook the heavens and the earth. Swoosh! Heaven's attack was about to hit Murongyu's body. At this moment, the 9 ancient characters gave off an even more dazzling light. At the same time, he appeared in front of Murongyu in a flash and slammed into the hand coming from the sky. Rumble! A dazzling light erupted. A terrifying power erupted, and the gigantic hand of Heaven was sent flying away. Thud, thud, thud. Heaven spat out a mouthful of blood. Then, he was forced to retreat over 100 steps before he could stabilize himself. On the other hand, Murongyu was completely fine. He was still floating in the void. However, the light from the 9 ancient characters dimmed significantly. At this moment, they had returned to Murongyu's side and continued to revolve around him. 9 ancient characters. When Heaven saw everything clearly, he was envious. Heaven could already sense the value of the word forwarding, let alone the 9 ancient characters. Although he did not recognize the ancient characters, he knew their estimated value. Kill. Heaven's killing intent surged. He wanted to kill Murongyu and obtain the 9 ancient characters. Therefore, he roared in his heart. He took a step forward and attacked Murongyu again. At the same time, Murongyu abruptly opened his eyes. However, he only glanced at Heaven. Then he tore open the void with his bare hands and charged in. Where do you think you're going? Heaven was furious, and his hand followed closely. However, Murongyu had already disappeared without a trace. Perhaps he could catch up to Murongyu when he was at his peak. However, he definitely could not now. Therefore, the many honorable martial artists who were imprisoned by Heaven heard Heaven's furious roar. After a while, a rain of blood fell from the holy world again. Obviously, Heaven was venting his anger on those honorable martial artists. However, all of this had nothing to do with Murongyu. At this moment, Murongyu had already entered the Hichu Luo Shu and was undergoing a transformation. Rumble, the realm that he had been unable to break through for a long time, finally broke through at this moment. He rushed to the 3-star honorable martial artist realm. However, the massive amount of energy continued to surge into his body, increasing his strength. He was advancing toward the 4-star honorable martial artist realm. Apart from that, Murongyu's improvement in other aspects was also terrifying. His combat strength had increased tremendously. Among them, the changes in the 9 syllables were the most obvious. After cultivating the 8 ancient characters, Murongyu could use each ancient character as a weapon to attack his opponent. However, each ancient character could only unleash the power that it contained. For example, the swordsman formula could only unleash the power of the soul. Moreover, 2 or more ancient characters could not be combined together. However, Ever since Murong Yu comprehended the last character, the 9 characters automatically combined together. It was just like how he blocked Heaven's attack earlier. This was not an active action by Murong Yu, but a passive defense. After encountering a powerful attack, the 9 syllables formula was automatically activated and blocked the attack. Although Heaven was heavily injured and his strength was weakened, a dominator was still a dominator. The 9 syllables formula easily broke Heaven's attack. Moreover, it was automatically activated. If it was activated automatically, it would have an even more terrifying defensive ability. Most importantly, Murong Yu had just comprehended the forward formula. As his comprehension deepened, the defensive ability of the 9 syllables formula would definitely increase. This was just the defensive aspect. The 9 syllables formula still had offensive aspects. Moreover, its offensive aspects were even more terrifying. Soul attacks, spatial attacks, time attacks, concealment, divination, increasing combat strength, and so on. The power of each ancient character was blended into it. If Murong Yu were to attack with the combination of the 9 ancient characters, then the attack would possess the same power as the 9 characters. If he was hit by such an attack, it would definitely not feel good, right? This was just the offensive and defensive aspects. It was just a small surprise that the 9 syllables formula gave to Murong Yu. However, Murong Yu did not believe that this was the so-called huge surprise of the 9 syllables formula. However, other than the increase in strength, offense, and defense, Murong Yu had not discovered any other surprises. However, Murong Yu knew that there would definitely be surprises. However, perhaps because he had not fully comprehended it, he was unable to discover any more surprises. Therefore, Murong Yu continued to comprehend the 9 syllables formula, especially the forward formula that he had just obtained. In the process of comprehending, Murong Yu realized that his comprehension ability was getting stronger and stronger. Therefore, he realized that the forward formula's ability was to increase comprehension ability. This was a good thing for Murong Yu. The higher one's comprehension ability, the faster one would comprehend. At the same time, one would comprehend more things. And the more things one obtained, the stronger one's comprehension ability would be. As this cycle continued, Murong Yu's ability and formlessness would become stronger and stronger. Under the acceleration of time, who knew how much time had passed? On this day, Murong Yu, who was comprehending the forward formula and the other 9 syllables formula, suddenly felt his divine telekinesis tremble. In the next moment, before he could react, his divine telekinesis had already spread out. In a flash, it covered the entire sacred world, the God world, the immortal world, and the mortal world. That's right, it covered all these areas in an instant. Everything in these worlds appeared in front of Murong Yu's eyes with incomparable clarity. As long as Murong Yu was willing, he could appear anywhere in these worlds. The sacred world and even the outer realms were covered by Murong Yu's divine telekinesis. Under the envelopment of his divine telekinesis, Murong Yu grasped the life and death of any life in these worlds. As long as he was willing, any life could be instantly exterminated. Of course, it was still a little difficult to exterminate heaven. This is the ability of a sovereign. Could it be that I have reached the sovereign realm? Murong Yu's heart trembled, and he was inexplicably shocked. His realm had only reached the 5-star supreme martial artist realm, and he had not reached the sovereign realm. However, Murong Yu's soul had broken through and reached the 9-star level. The 8-star level corresponded to the supreme martial artist realm, and the 9-star level was naturally the sovereign realm. His soul had reached the sovereign realm. Chapter 1826. 9-Star Soul. Murong Yu's divine sense roamed the entire holy world. Although he had concealed his aura, the supreme aura still shook the world. Countless lives were awed by it. What Murong Yu didn't know was that when his soul reached the level of 9 stars and entered the ruler realm, the sculptures he had placed all over the holy realm, God realm, immortal realm, and mortal realm were naturally enveloped in a seven-colored light. Although the rainbow light wasn't very strong, the statues were surrounded by rainbow holy light. A supreme aura was constantly being emitted from the statue, shaking the heavens and earth, causing people to involuntarily feel a sense of reverence. Rainbow light. One had to know that Supremes could only emit rainbow light from their heads. The rainbow light was naturally the sovereign realm. At this time, news about Supremes and sovereigns had already spread in the holy world. Therefore, when they saw Murong Yu statues being enveloped by the rainbow light, everyone believed that Murong Yu had broken through to the sovereign realm. The so-called sovereign realm was the sovereign realm. Therefore, countless people became more and more devout to Murong Yu. Some people who weren't Murong Yu's followers naturally became Murong Yu's followers, causing Murong Yu's power of faith to skyrocket. Originally, the entire holy world was enveloped by blood clouds and blood rain, and the smell of blood was everywhere. However, after Murong Yu's breakthrough, the blood clouds seemed to have suddenly disappeared. They were dispersed by the rainbow light, and the holy world returned to its original clear sky. Just as Murong Yu's soul reached the sovereign stage, the high heavens in the outer realm began to laugh. After devouring all the Supremes, his strength had finally recovered, and he had even improved. However, the price was that other than Shenzhen, Niuhua, Wushuang, and a few other Supremes, all the other Supremes were killed. This included Supremes True Marshal, Xuetao, and other super experts. In other words, there were less than 10 Supremes in the holy world now. They were definitely top experts. There's only one Supremes in the holy world. That one person is me. Murong Yu, even if your soul has broken through to the Paragon level, you are still not my match. As long as I devour and possess you, I'll be able to successfully break through the cycle of reincarnation. Cold light flickered in Song Tian's eyes. As he spoke, he took a step forward and flew into the distance. In principle, there could only be one overlord in the sacred world. This was because the sacred world only had one sacred world origin. Only those who had obtained the acknowledgement of the origin source of the sacred world had the qualifications to become a ruler. But now, the source energy of the sacred world had been split into 9 parts. Murong Yu had obtained 3 parts, while heaven had obtained 4 parts. Therefore, in theory, their strength or cultivation could all break through to the sovereign realm. However, strictly speaking, Murong Yu and Chang Tian weren't real sovereigns. They were only pseudo-sovereigns. Only by killing the other party and seizing the source energy of the holy world that the other party had refined, as well as the other 2 source energies whose whereabouts were unknown, could one become a true sovereign. Of course, these 2 people could also exist at the same time. However, a mountain couldn't contain 2 tigers. The 2 of them couldn't coexist peacefully. Moreover, even without this aspect, Song Tian wanted to seize Murong Yu's physical body. On the other hand, Murong Yu wanted to kill Song Tian. Only one of them could survive. 9-star soul. I didn't expect my soul to break through first this time. Murong Yu smiled as he felt the powerful energy coursing through him. Soul sages were stronger than ordinary sages. This could be seen from the fact that there weren't many soul sages in the sacred world. Murong Yu felt that with his current strength, he couldn't kill Song Tian. However, he definitely had the strength to fight him. After all, Song Tian was a ruler. Moreover, he was a ruler who had controlled the sacred world for countless years. He definitely had some special means to protect his life. As for Murong Yu, other than his soul, there was still a huge gap between his physical body and a ruler's strength. He didn't have much confidence in fighting against Song Tian. Of course, Murong Yu didn't have the intention to kill Song Tian now. Since he couldn't kill Song Tian now, he couldn't be bothered to do so. He might as well increase his strength before killing Song Tian. However, even though Murong Yu didn't have the intention to kill Song Tian now, it didn't mean that Song Tian didn't have the intention to kill him now. Murong Yu's divine will that covered the entire sacred world found Song Tian very quickly. At this moment, Song Tian was flying towards Murong at an extremely fast speed. Murong snorted coldly, and his face turned gloomy. Since Song Tian wanted to die, what was he afraid of? Therefore, he walked out of the Hichu Luo Shu and stood quietly in the sky outside the realm. He looked in the direction Song Tian was flying towards. Before long, Song Tian appeared in Murong line of sight. Song Tian stood not far away from Murong and looked at Murong with a terrifying cold light in his eyes. As expected of the chaotic, celestial body, your talent is heaven-defying. You've already reached the ruler realm in such a short time. To be honest, your talent surprises me. If you were given more time, you would probably surpass me. Murong sneered at the familiar yet unfamiliar face in front of him. Heavens, you must be regretting it right now, right? Are you regretting not killing me earlier? Your talent scares me. However, I don't regret it because you're still not my match. However, I can't wait any longer. The chaotic celestial body will be mine. Murong just looked at Song Tian indifferently. You're too confident. Song Tian laughed. Murong, don't think that you can control everything in the wooden house just because your soul has reached the ruler realm. Today, I'll show you who's the real ruler and who's the strongest in the holy world. That person is me. You, on the other hand, are merely an ant. I could easily crush you in the past, and I can do it now. Before he finished speaking, Song Tian had already taken a step forward. Suddenly, a terrifying aura swept toward Murong like a torrent. Domain. The domain formed by 4/9 of the holy world's origin energy swept toward Murong. A cold light flashed in Murong eyes. He burst out laughing and released 3/9 of his domain. Rumble. Domains were originally formless and intangible. However, at this moment, they were like two gusts of wind that swept toward each other with Song Tian and Murong as the starting point. In the blink of an eye, the two gusts of wind collided violently. Time seemed to stop at this moment. The next moment, an earth-shattering sound was heard. Rip! The void of the outer realm was directly torn apart. A huge black hole was forming rapidly. This was the result of the collision of the two forces that tore the void apart. The two domains shattered instantly. Murong entire domain collapsed. On the other hand, although Song Tian's soul was also shattered, there was still a quarter of it left. The winner was obvious. In the collision of the holy world's origin energy, Song Tian won. After all, Song Tian had 4/9 of the holy world's origin energy, while Murong only had 3/9. Bang! Murong body was like an ancient sacred mountain that had crashed into it. A huge force came and sent him flying. Immediately, the clothes on the surface of his body were smashed into powder. However, when the force hit his body, Murong's body shone with 5-colored sacred light. It was the light of a supreme weapon. A supreme weapon-level body? When Song Tian saw the 5-colored holy light flickering on Murong's body, his eyes couldn't help but light up. His face was filled with excitement. He had been the ruler of the holy world for many years. During this time, he had spent a lot of time improving his physical body. However, he had been unable to break through to the supreme weapon level. It had been stuck at the chaotic ancestral weapon level. If I take over this body, I can improve it to the level of a ruler weapon. It is indeed a chaotic, celestial body. Song Tian was overjoyed. This was because he had already regarded Murong's body as his own. Of course, it was better for his own things to be stronger. Murong's body shone with 5-colored sacred light, and it did not take long for the force to dissipate. However, when he saw Song Tian's overjoyed face, his face darkened. This body was still his, and it would be his in the future. Why was this guy so happy? However, since this guy wanted to fight, then let's fight. Holy Soul Slash. Murong immediately used his most powerful soul fighting skill. The speed of the Holy Soul Slash, which contained the power of faith, was unparalleled. When it was slashed out, it reached the top of Song Tian's head and slashed at his soul space. When he saw Murong's attack, Song Tian looked disdainful. He curled his lips and even sneered. He did not block Moron Yu's soul slash. Instead, he sneered. What was going on? Moron Yu was a little depressed and curious at the same time. He was curious why Song Tian was so confident. Buzz. At this moment, the holy soul slash had already entered Song Tian's soul space. However, Moron Yu only saw a ripple in the void near Song Tian's head, and Song Tian's face turned pale. After that, there was no more after that. His soul attack was like a clay ox entering the sea, disappearing without a trace. His soul slash had failed. Moron Yu's face was filled with disbelief. This was the first time his soul slash had failed. Although there had been similar situations in the past, the other party had shattered his soul slash with a punch or forcefully blocked it. However, now, there was only a ripple, and there was no more after that. Haha, are you surprised? I knew that you were a soul dominator, and I still came over. Do you know why your soul slash was useless against me? Do you know what my weapon of domination is? When Chang Tian saw the shock on Moron Yu's face, he burst into laughter, feeling extremely smug. Chapter 1827. While laughing, Chang Tian suddenly said something shocking. Moron Yu was shocked. Ruler's weapon. Every ruler only had one ruler's weapon. Just like how a sovereign's weapon was equivalent to a sovereign, a ruler's weapon would be equivalent to a ruler's weapon if it unleashed its full power. Even if it wasn't as strong as a real ruler, it was definitely stronger than a titled. In other words, if Chang Tian took out his ruler's weapon, his combat strength would be doubled. And Chang Tian's ruler's weapon was actually the ruler's soul's ruler's weapon. In other words, Chang Tian was now equivalent to a ruler of both cultivation and soul. His strength was definitely stronger than any sovereign's. Most importantly, because of the ruler's weapon, Moron Yu's soul attack was basically useless. His soul had reached the level of 9 stars, which meant that he had stepped into the ruler's realm. But at most, it was on par with Chang Tian's soul's ruler's weapon. It couldn't break through the ruler's weapon's defenses and kill Chang Tian's soul. In other words, one of Moron Yu's most powerful attacks, his soul attack, was completely useless. Moron Yu, are you shocked? Chang Tian was still laughing. 7-colored holy light suddenly flashed above his head. In the next moment, a holy weapon that emitted 7-colored holy light like a shield appeared above Chang Tian's head. This was Chang Tian's soul's ruler's weapon. At this moment, the soul's ruler's weapon spun slowly above Chang Tian's head. 7-colored holy light poured down and protected Chang Tian's entire body. Sensing the enormous aura, Moron Yu's pupils abruptly shrank. He roughly sensed it and compared it. Then, his face darkened. Although his soul attack was powerful, it might not be able to break through the shield's defenses and kill Chang Tian's soul. Chang Tian's ambition is really big. Moron Yu thought to himself. His eyes were filled with killing intent. Normally, after a ruler became a ruler, they would forge their own ruler's weapon. But they would only forge ordinary ruler's weapons, because ruler's weapons of souls were very difficult to forge. After all, just like heaven, he wasn't a saint soul at all. If he wanted to forge a soul sovereign armament, it would be tens of thousands of times more difficult than forging an ordinary sovereign armament. However, heaven's ambition was too great. He actually spent a lot of time crafting the soul dominator weapon. If there were 2 sovereigns in the sacred world, then heaven, who possessed the sovereign soul armament, would definitely be able to kill the other sovereign instantly. This was the power of a soul saint artifact. Moron Yu reckoned that aside from increasing his strength and increasing his chances of breaking through the cycle of reincarnation, the most likely reason for heaven's refinement of the soul saint was to prevent him from being killed. After all, he'd only been able to ascend to this position because he'd killed the previous sovereign. Song Tian was extremely pleased with himself. He didn't refine the soul dominator armament to deal with Moron Yu. He just wanted to increase his own strength. However, he did not expect that he would be able to use it against Moron Yu today. If it wasn't for the sovereign soul weapon, it would have been difficult for heaven to deal with Moron Yu. After all, if they were both in the sovereign realm, the Soul Dominator could definitely kill other sovereigns instantly. It was because of his sovereign soul weapon that Heaven knew that Murong Yu's soul had reached the sovereign realm and still came to kill him. He had nothing to fear. Die! Heaven suddenly roared and threw a punch at Murong Yu. If it was just based on physical strength and cultivation, Murong Yu was no match for Heaven. Therefore, Murong Yu immediately retreated. However, Heaven's cultivation had long reached the sovereign realm. His speed was far above Murong Yu's. With a boom, Heaven's fist, which was as big as a mountain, appeared in front of Murong Yu out of thin air. It carried a terrifying aura that could destroy heaven and earth as it rapidly attacked Murong Yu. Before the fist even arrived, the frightening aura it emitted already caused Murong Yu's skin to hurt. Even his soul started to tremble because of it. The power of a sovereign realm could definitely shatter a supreme weapon with a punch. Of course, Murong Yu was sure that Heaven would not shatter his physical body. He would only shatter his soul. Time freeze. Murong Yu was definitely not a sitting duck. As he retreated, he had already used one of his most powerful attacks, the rules of time. Bang! However, Heaven's strength was too terrifying. With a punch, the time freeze was shattered. It could not stop Heaven's attack at all. Time reversal. After Heaven's time freeze shattered, an even greater amount of time power enveloped Heaven out of thin air. With a whoosh, firmament disappeared from Murong Yu's sight. Time reversal was a success. Murong Yu was stunned at first. Then he was overjoyed. However, before he could finish being happy, the void in front of him shattered. However, Chang Tian had already stepped out of the void with a furious look on his face. You can control the power of time? However, even so, you can't change the fact that you're going to die. Heaven roared and pounced on Murong Yu again. Murong Yu's heart sank. Although time reversal was effective, it did not even last for an instant. However, it seemed like such a short time was enough. Is that so? Let's do it again. Murong Yu sneered and attacked with the power of time again. However, this time, it was different from the previous time. This time, it was accompanied by the power of faith. Heaven sneered. After Murong Yu had time reversal and returned to the past, he had already released his power and filled the surrounding void. As such, Murong Yu's power of time could not send him back to the past. However, before he could finish being happy, the scene in front of him changed and Murong Yu was nowhere to be seen. It was not that Murong Yu had escaped. Instead, he was sent back to the past by time reversal. Heaven raised his head and roared. Both of his hands punched out repeatedly, blasting out in all directions. Kacha! Kacha! The power of time that Murong Yu had wrapped around him was shattered by his 2 to 3 punches. The scene in front of Heaven changed again, and he was back in the holy world when he reappeared. Kill him! Before Heaven could stand firm after returning to the holy world, he heard Murong Yu's roar. At the same time, an extremely dangerous aura shrouded his heart. A large expanse of rainbow-colored light that flickered with a dangerous aura shattered the void and smashed down toward the sky at lightning speed. A cold light flashed across Heaven's eyes, and he was even more furious. That was because he had seen clearly what was attacking him. It was 9 ancient words that were connected into a circle. The forwarding word that Murong Yu had snatched from him was among them. Putting aside the value of the ancient word, the fact that Murong Yu had snatched it from him was enough to make him furious. Swoosh! Song Tian reached out his hand and grabbed the 9 ancient words that were connected into a circle. Didn't Murong Yu snatch an ancient word that was supposed to belong to him? If that was the case, then he would snatch all 9 ancient characters. In the blink of an eye, Heaven's hand had already grabbed onto the circle. Heaven was overjoyed, and his hand was about to snatch the 9 ancient words back. However, at that moment, the 9 ancient words suddenly burst out with a ball of rainbow-colored light. A terrifying power burst out from his body. After a loud explosion, the big hand that stretched out from Song Tian was blown to pieces. As for the 9 ancient characters, they slammed down on Heaven's head with a swoosh. Soul attack, power space, power of time. At that moment, heaven felt a few different types of attacks. Moreover, the power of these attacks was extremely terrifying. If heaven's head were to be struck, it would be smashed into smithereens. Chang Tian's face changed drastically as he retreated hastily. At the same time, the soul-dominating weapon that had been spinning slowly above his head went towards the 9 ancient words. Bang! After a loud bang, the 9 ancient words that had been connected were blown apart. They turned into 9 ancient words and smashed through the void. With a swoosh, they entered Murong Yu's mind. On the other side, Heaven's soul-dominating weapon was also blown away by the tremendous power. Saint's soul slash. Opportunity knocks, but once. Murong Yu seized the opportunity and raised his soul power to the maximum. Then, he mixed it with the power of faith and slashed at Heaven's soul. Buzz. Heaven's soul trembled violently, and an aura of death instantly shrouded Heaven's heart. Heaven was shocked and furious. He immediately circulated his power to the maximum and rushed into the soul space to protect his soul. At the same time, he frantically controlled the soul-dominating weapon that had been blown away. Boom! The saint's soul slashed down fiercely. The terrifying attack tore through Heaven's first layer of defense. His attack was transparent in front of the saint's soul slash and could not stop the attack at all. The saint's soul slash was getting closer and closer to Heaven's soul. Heaven panicked. If his soul was hit, he would be killed even if he was a dominating weapon. Thus, he turned all of his power around to attack the saint's soul slash. At the same time, the soul-dominating weapon that had been blown away turned into a stream of light and shot back to protect Heaven's soul. However, Murong Yu had finally gotten this opportunity. How could he miss it? The 9 syllables of truth attacked the soul-dominating weapon that had been shot back. At the same time, a black light shot out from Murong Yu's body and smashed through the void. It slashed at Heaven's soul at a speed faster than the soul-dominating weapon. Weapon fragments. Originally, Heaven's heart was shrouded by an extremely strong aura of death. Now, the aura of death had increased by tens of thousands of times. Heaven's shock was no small matter. Chapter 1828. Chang Tian was busy dealing with Murong Yu's soul attack, and his soul dominator weapon was sent flying by Murong Yu's 9 syllables of truth, so he did not have the time to defend himself. At this moment, Murong Yu took out the weapon fragment. The weapon fragment was Murong Yu's most frightening trump card at the moment. Ordinary supreme weapons would be shattered with a single touch, especially after Murong Yu's breakthrough. The power of the weapon fragment was even more terrifying. Murong Yu even felt that if his blade landed on the ruler's armament, a corner of the ruler's armament would be blown away. In fact, if Murong Yu was even stronger, then even a ruler's armament would have been shattered in one strike. Murong Yu did not take out the weapon fragment suddenly, but he had been waiting for the opportunity to take out the weapon fragment. Chang Tian was shocked. He knew that if he could not block the light shadow, he would definitely die. At this moment, the ruler weapon was still far away, and he could not defend himself in time. What could he do? Domain. Suppress it. Chang Tian roared angrily. He pushed all the origin energy of the saint's world to the limit in a single instance, forming a medium-sized domain. Afterwards, it rapidly pressed down on the black streak of light. At the same time, his body flashed, and he shot backward at an extremely fast speed. During this process, he clapped his hands, and terrifying waves of energy constantly spewed out from his palms, tearing the sky and splitting the earth, and fiercely attacking the weapon fragment. Spatial imprisonment. Time freeze. Saint's soul slash. Heavenly King Great Sage Technique. After taking out the weapon fragment, Murong Yu's attack did not stop at all. Great Sage techniques and ultimate moves were constantly spewed out, covering the sky and earth, and bombarding Chang Tian violently. At this moment, Murong Yu's first Saint's soul slash finally broke through the Heavenly King's power and slashed on Chang Tian's soul. Although most of the power had been destroyed, even a trace of the attack slashed on the soul. Although Chang Tian's soul was strong, he was not a soul saint. Without the protection of the power, he appeared naked in front of Murong Yu. Although Chang Tian's soul dodged in time, he was still hit in the end. Even though he wasn't killed, heaven still snorted out coldly in pain as his face turned pale white. A corner of his soul had been cut off. Although it was not serious, it still affected Chang Tian's strength. In a battle between experts, a small impact could affect the entire battle. Puffed, puffed, puffed. The power of the domain directly suppressed the weapon fragment. Originally, Chang Tian wanted to suppress the weapon fragment, but at this moment, the weapon fragment's power. First, the weapon fragment, the weapon's first, the weapons burst with a burst. Chang Tian's soul power that was suppressing the weapon fragment was directly shattered. On the other hand, the weapon fragment was still extremely violent. First, it shook slightly in the void. Then it charged toward Chang Tian at an even faster speed than before. Murong Yu was slightly stunned, and a look of shock appeared on his face. Originally, he already had a preliminary control over the weapon fragment, so when he used the weapon fragment, he did not need to expend too much power. However, at this moment, an extremely terrifying, devouring power burst out from the weapon fragment. Before he could react, all the power in his body, including his soul power, had been sucked dry in one gulp. Fast, extremely fast. The weapon fragment speed was so fast that even Murong Yu's divine telekinesis could not capture its trajectory. After devouring all of Murong Yu's power, the weapon fragment's burst of power even made Murong Yu, who was half its owner, tremble in fear. At the same time, this terrifying power had already enveloped the entire holy world. The void was shattering, and the endless mountain range was trembling. Everything was as if the end of the world had arrived. The terrifying pressure suppressed the entire holy world, the divine world, the immortal world, and all the other living beings involuntarily prostrated themselves on the ground. In fact, Murong Yu even realized that the entire holy world was trembling violently under the power of the weapon fragment, as if it was on the verge of shattering. Murong Yu was shocked. What was the origin of this weapon fragment? It was just a palm-sized weapon fragment, but the power it unleashed was almost enough to destroy the holy world. Murong Yu did not doubt that if this weapon fragment really wanted to destroy the holy world, it would not be difficult at all. However, he did not want the holy world to be destroyed. In the current holy world, even Chang Tian had not broken through the cycle of reincarnation. Once the saint's world was destroyed, all of them would follow the saint's world. They would be as dead as they could be. What? How is this possible? Chang Tian could not help but roar when he felt the terrifying power of the weapon fragment. This power was just too strong. Chang Tian did not even have the heart to fight back. One could only imagine how terrifying the weapon fragment was. Murong Yu could only watch as the shard of the weapon pierced through Chang Tian's forehead and exited from the back of his head, bringing with it a large amount of blood. There was only a shallow wound on Chang Tian's head, but it was extremely hideous and could not be healed. What shocked and surprised Murong Yu the most was that although Chang Tian's eyes were filled with anger and his face was filled with indignation, however, his life force was rapidly disappearing. "I'm indignant," heaven roared furiously. Then, that tall figure came crashing down like a mountain. At the same time, blood clouds and blood rain covered the holy world once again. In fact, there were even loud roars between heaven and earth, as if there was a sorrowful wail. This was a phenomenon of heaven and earth that did not occur after the fall of an honorable being. Chang Tian was dead. Looking at Chang Tian's corpse in front of him, Murong Yu's eyes were filled with disbelief. Chang Tian, the ruler, died just like that? If there was no phenomenon of heaven and earth, Murong Yu would not believe that Chang Tian was killed just like that. However, even though there was a phenomenon of heaven and earth, Murong Yu still could not believe that Chang Tian died just like that. This guy was the strongest person in the holy world. Murong knew that he would eventually kill Chang Tian. However, this was not the time. He was still too weak and did not have the ability to kill Chang Tian at all. Weapon fragment. Murong took out the weapon fragment that turned into a stream of light and entered his body after killing Chang Tian. The weapon fragment did not change much from before. It was almost exactly the same. If there was a change, it would be that the weapon fragment was now brighter than before. Murong tried to control the weapon fragment once. He realized that his control over the weapon fragment had increased. Naturally, the power of the weapon fragment was also stronger than before. Killing a titled honorable being was not a problem. However, if he wanted to kill a ruler, he still did not have the ability to do so. Murong looked at the weapon fragment in his hand seriously. However, he was thinking about the background of this master. How could it be so terrifying? The reason why he killed Chang Tian just now was because the weapon fragment acted on its own. It seemed to have been provoked and directly sucked all of Murong power, including his soul power, dry. Then, it exploded with a terrifying power that almost destroyed the entire holy world and killed Chang Tian. That must be it. Although the weapon fragment was only left with the tip of the blade, it was extremely arrogant and did not allow anyone to provoke it. Chang Tian wanted to use the source of the holy world to suppress it, and this angered this master. Therefore, this master unleashed its power and killed Chang Tian. Murong thought to himself. He was pretty close to the truth. However, the more he thought about it, the more curious he was about the level of the weapon fragment. The weapon fragment was definitely something used by the supreme existence of the extraterrestrial civilization. However, why did it fall into the holy world? Moreover, just the tip of the blade had such terrifying power. What if it was in its complete form? How terrifying would its power be? How could such a terrifying weapon fragment be destroyed? Then how terrifying was the strength of the person who destroyed the weapon fragment? An expert at that level was definitely stronger than a ruler. However, wasn't the realm above a ruler the primal chaos controller? Could there be other realms? Were there even stronger existences? Like the Sun Monarch, what level of existence did he belong to in the extraterrestrial civilization? For a moment, Murong's heart was filled with boundless battle intent. He wanted to break through reincarnation and leave the holy world to travel to the extraterrestrial civilization. Perhaps only those people were truly immortal. Murong shook his head. Those were his goals, but they were still too far away from him. He had to become the true ruler of the holy world and break through reincarnation before he had the right to leave the holy world. Otherwise, everything would be just fleeting clouds. He shook those unrealistic thoughts out of his head and put the weapon fragment back into his body. Then, he looked at Chang Tian's corpse and his soul dominator weapon. If I refine Chang Tian's corpse and his soul dominator weapon, my cultivation should be able to break through to the supremacy stage, right? Murong thought to himself. He had already reached out his hand and was about to take Chang Tian's corpse and the soul dominator weapon away. However, at this moment, an extremely terrifying blade ray shot out from the depths of the void. It shattered billions of space-time and locked onto Murong. It slashed down viciously. A cold, killing intent flashed across Murong's eyes. Although his strength had not fully recovered and his soul space was empty without any soul power, he was still in the holy world. However, other than Chang Tian, who else in the holy world could be his opponent? Even his physical body that had reached the level of a supreme weapon made him almost invincible in the holy world. With a cold snort, Murong abruptly turned around. Aiming at the frightening blade ray, he ruthlessly threw a punch at it. Chapter 1829. Bang! Murong's fist smashed the incoming blade ray into smithereens. Murong turned around, his eyes flickering with a cold glint as he looked in the direction of the incoming blade. The blade radiance was very powerful and had reached the sovereign realm. However, Morong didn't even need to use his strength to easily destroy the blade ray. After all, his physical body had reached the sovereign realm. Come out. Morong was enraged. The millions of roots of the tree of life that were rooted in the endless primal chaos began to tremble violently. Every moment, they would devour a large amount of primal chaos energy and replenish Morong body. This allowed Morong's depleted strength to recover rapidly. When he smashed the blade radiance with one punch, his strength had basically recovered to the peak. At this moment, he suddenly roared and reached out his hand, grabbing at the void in the distance. Even though his soul power had not recovered and his cultivation was far from the sovereign realm, he was at least not weaker than an ordinary titled sovereign. Therefore, Morong's claw shattered billions of space-time. Plop! In the depths of the void in the distance, a figure fell from the void. It was a young man in gray. At this moment, he was looking at Morong in shock. His eyes were filled with disbelief. A mere one-star sovereign dares to attack me. You're courting death. When Morong saw the young man in gray, his eyes were filled with a terrifying murderous intent. The young man in gray was a one-star sovereign. Most importantly, this person's aura was rather unstable. In other words, this person might have broken through to the sovereign realm recently. Then, there was only one possibility. This person was the mysterious person who had broken through to the sovereign realm before Morong. This person was not killed by the sovereign realm. With a thought, Morong came to a realization. Those people who were killed and swallowed by the firmament were sent there on their own accord because of the firmament's tyranny. As for this gray-robed youth, he had just broken through to the honorable realm and didn't know how terrifying heaven was. Naturally, he didn't go to Heaven Mountain Range. However, this guy actually dared to sneak an attack on Morong. Could it be that he thought that Morong could perish together with the heavens? Or perhaps even though Morong had killed heaven, he was already at the end of his rope? Only then did he dare to make a move. No matter what, he had to die. Morong's speed did not slow down at all, and he directly grabbed over. Wait a minute, I didn't mean to attack you, The gray-clothed youth was almost scared to death by the terrifying power that erupted from Morong. General Fan quickly retreated as he explained. Die. Morong snorted coldly and pointed a finger at the gray-clothed youth. Bang! The one-star sovereign's entire body and soul were shattered into pieces, turning into a cloud of blood mist. He couldn't be any more dead. Right now, the one-star sovereign was just an ant in Morong's eyes. In fact, Morong didn't even need to make a move. He just needed to glare at him to death. After killing the gray-clothed youth, Morong took a step forward and disappeared from the spot. In the following time, Morong didn't immediately refine Heaven's body and his soul sovereign weapon. Instead, he carefully walked around the holy world and the outer region. Other than Shenzhen's honorable realm, there were no other honorable realm experts in the holy world. Of course, the heavenly demonists didn't count. As for whether there were still some honorable realm experts who were hiding and hadn't died, Morong didn't know for now. At this moment, although Morong hadn't become the true ruler of the holy world, he was already the ruler. Shenzhen's person flew up again. Moreover, this time, he openly established his sect in the holy world and no longer hid in the immemorial world. After all, who would dare to touch Shenzhen now? Other than Morong, Shenzhen also had a few honorable realm experts. Moreover, Niuhua and Wu Shuang, the two titled honorable realm experts, were also overseeing the holy world. The holy world had finally completed its true unification. Moreover, under the operations of Morong, Shenzhen, and the others, Shenzhen was like the God world, immortal world, and other worlds becoming the only holy ground. There was no restriction on race. Shenzhen only recruited disciples with potential and good aptitude. This was because Morong knew that the holy world wasn't the final stage for cultivators. Moreover, the unification was extremely beneficial to Morong. His power of faith was increasing and becoming purer. This power of faith wouldn't disappear even if Morong left the holy world in the future. Instead, it would continue to pour into his body. Unless the people in the holy world no longer believed in Murong Yu, or if Murong Yu took the initiative to cut them off. Without the other honorable realm experts causing trouble, Murong Yu could finally prepare to raise his strength without any distractions. He didn't directly refine Chang Tian's physical body and his soul's sovereign weapon. First, Murong Yu refined the holy world's origin source that was originally forcefully refined by Chang Tian. After killing Chang Tian, Murong Yu controlled 4/9 of the holy world's origin source. In the end, it wasn't difficult to refine it directly. 7/9 of the holy world's origin source was already controlled by Murong Yu. Now, only 2/9 of the holy world's origin source wasn't found. Before this, Murong Yu searched the entire holy world but didn't find the remaining 2 portions of the holy world's origin source. However, after he refined the holy world's origin source that originally belonged to Chang Tian, he sensed the remaining holy world's origin source. One of them was in the god world, transformed into a god weapon, and was controlled by an expert. When Murong Yu discovered it, his face couldn't help but darken, because that expert was an expert from Shenzhen, and he had appeared in front of Murong Yu before. In fact, Murong Yu had seen that god weapon before. It was just that he didn't discover anything at that time. Therefore, Murong Yu used a peak-grade god weapon to exchange for the holy world's origin source. Furthermore, Murong Yu had personally given that expert some pointers. Although these were far from the holy world's origin source, it was enough to make that expert from the god world feel grateful towards Murong Yu. The last portion of the holy world's origin source was in the depths of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains in the mortal world. Pillar of Heaven's Mountains, which was also the place where Murong Yu changed Murong Yu back then. In the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains, Murong Yu met Hichu Luo Shu, and from then on, his fate began to change. Rumble. When Murong Yu refined the 9 portions of the holy world's origin source, and when the holy world's origin source fused into one, the entire holy world shook violently. However, although this tremor was intense, it only lasted for a moment, and some people didn't even notice it. Even if they did, they would only think that it was an illusion. I've finally gained complete control of the holy world. Murong Yu didn't need to extend his divine sense to envelop the entire holy world. Right now, the holy world was like a part of Murong Yu's body. He could appear anywhere in the holy world in an instant if he wanted to. As long as he wanted to, he could kill any life in the holy world with a single thought. He controlled everything in the holy world. This was a ruler. However, Murong Yu also discovered that even though he had become a ruler, his divine sense couldn't penetrate the outer realm and reach the endless starry sky outside. It was as if there was an extremely powerful barrier outside the holy world that blocked everything. Besides that, Murong Yu discovered that even though he was a ruler, he couldn't revive a person out of thin air, just like his parents in the mortal world. Although Murong Yu had already extracted a strand of their souls, he couldn't revive them. Rulers were the strongest existences in the holy world, but it seemed like they were still a little weak. Could it be because my cultivation level hasn't reached that level yet? Murong Yu pondered as he began to refine Chang Tian's body and his ruler weapon. If he wanted to leave the holy world and roam the endless starry sky, Murong Yu needed to have the strength to break through reincarnation. However, he couldn't even sense any signs of it. His strength wasn't there yet. While he was refining Chang Tian's body, Murong Yi and the others who had been revived by Murong Yu with the soul fruit also began to break through to the supremacy stage. Other than them, Murong Yixian, Mu Liue, and the others were also found by Murong Yu. Various existences like the heart of the ocean and the heart of the devil were fused with them. Murong Yu is definitely going to leave the holy world in the future. However, he didn't want his family and Shenzhen to be killed after he left the holy world. Therefore, before he left, he had to nurture his family and the experts of Shenzhen. Not to mention that all the supremacies in the holy world were Shenzhen's people. But at least Shenzhen had people who could control the situation and prevent Murong Yu's orthodoxy from being destroyed. When Murong Yu completely refined Chang Tian's clone and reached the level of a 9-star supremacy, Murong Yi and the others broke through as well. Their bodies were already terrifying. As long as they cultivated diligently, they would reach the level of a supremacy artifact sooner or later. After Murong Yu became a ruler, all sorts of heavenly treasures piled up as if they were free. Breaking through to the supremacy stage couldn't be any easier. First, it was Murong Yi, Kurlan, and the others. Then, Zhao Jiqing, Murong Yi, and the others broke through one after another. Murong Yu's clone also successfully broke through. After cultivating the Sun Sutra, the clone's strength and talent became more and more heaven-defying. Of course, this was also because the previous supremacies were all killed by Chang Tian. Otherwise, if the supremacies of the Holy World reached the state of berserk, they wouldn't be able to break through no matter how heaven-defying they were. This was the limit of the world. It had nothing to do with one's talent or talent. As long as I refine this soul supremacy artifact, I can definitely reach the ruler realm. Murong Yu took out Chang Tian's soul supremacy artifact and was about to refine it. However, at this moment, boom, very suddenly, the entire Saint's world seemed to have been struck by something. Before Murong Yu could react, an incomparably frightening aura erupted from the point of impact and rapidly spread out in all directions. In an instant, it enveloped the entire holy world. Plop, plop, plop. Just as the terrifying aura enveloped the entire holy world, most of the saints in the holy world were suppressed to the point of prostrating on the ground. In fact, some of the weaker sages were directly shattered into pieces. Chapter 1830. Back to the previous moment. Holy World, Qinghe Mountain Range. A ship the size of a mountain suddenly tore through the void and appeared in the sky above Qinghe Mountain Range. However, this ship was different from ordinary ships. This was because it was a flying ship, a flying magic artifact. In the Holy World, there were countless flying saint artifacts like this. However, they were usually not very big. After all, if a flying saint artifact was bigger, the consumption of saint crystals or saint veins during the flight would increase exponentially. Moreover, the materials used during the manufacturing process were the same. Therefore, flying saint artifacts that could carry thousands or tens of thousands of people were already considered top-notch in the Holy World. However, the ship in front of him was as big as a mountain. Not to mention tens of thousands of people, it could even carry hundreds of thousands or millions of people. There was no such ship in the Holy World. After all, even those supreme experts could not afford the resources used by the ship. The consumption of saint veins for every second of this ship was a terrifying number. In the entire Holy World, even Murong Yu could not afford to use it. However, this ship that appeared out of nowhere was a little tattered, as if it had been flying in the endless starry sky for billions of eras and was corroded by the river of time. After the ship appeared, it charged into Qinghe Mountain Range at an extremely terrifying speed. Boom! After a shocking explosion, the boundless Qinghe Mountain Range was instantly shattered by the shockwave from the collision of the ship. From then on, Qinghe Mountain Range no longer existed. The moment the ship crashed into Qinghe Mountain Range, Murong Yu felt the entire holy world tremble violently. Clearly, the trembling of the holy world was caused by the collision of a ship. A collision of a ship caused the entire holy world to tremble? What was the origin of this ship? Its power was actually so terrifying? Moreover, this was only a tattered ship that fell into the holy world. If a complete spaceship intentionally crashed into the holy realm, wouldn't the holy realm be smashed into pieces? In fact, it had even exploded into pieces. The entire ship sank deep into the ground of the holy world. Very soon, an extremely terrifying power erupted from the bottom of the ship. With a bang, the entire spaceship suddenly collapsed and flew up. Following that, a black shadow turned into a stream of light and shot out from the depths of the ground. Pooey, what kind of place is this? The black shadow stood still. It was a young man who was about 26 or 27 years old. Looking from afar, this person had an arrogant look on his face. In fact, there was even a hint of nobility emanating from his body. It was obvious that this person was the son of a wealthy family. As he spoke, the young man in brocade clothes released his enormous divine sense. In the blink of an eye, his divine sense had enveloped Murong-Yu. His speed was almost the same as Murong-Yu's. Could it be that this outsider was a sovereign? Enveloped by the senses of the soul, everything in the saint's world appeared in the young man's head with great clarity. There was nowhere to hide. However, the young man in embroidered clothes quickly shook his head. His originally arrogant face was now filled with disdain. How unlucky. I actually came to such a desolate place. A star ball? Although there were cultivators, they were all ants. Not even a sector lord. At the same time, a hint of disappointment flashed across the young man's face. Even if I refine such a planet, I'm afraid it won't be able to heal my injuries. However, although the level of the planet is low, it's better than nothing. It turned out that the young man in embroidered clothes was actually injured. Moreover, his injuries seemed to be quite severe. Presumably, his spaceship was riddled with holes because it was destroyed by his enemies. The reason why he appeared in the saint's world was probably because he was being hunted down by his enemies. Outsider. When a young man in embroidered clothes enveloped the entire saint's world with his spiritual force, Murong-Yu had already seen him. In fact, when the spaceship entered the saint's world, Murong-Yu should have already noticed it. However, at that time, Murong-Yu was focused on increasing his cultivation and did not pay attention to it at all. Who is this person? His strength is actually so much more terrifying than Chang Tian's. Sensing the strength of the young man in embroidered clothes, Murong-Yu was shocked. Chang Tian was very powerful. He was even more powerful than Murong-Yu. The reason why Murong-Yu was able to kill him was all because of the weapon fragment. That was an accident. Of course, Murong-Yu's strength had increased by a lot. Even if he could not kill Chang Tian in a battle, he could still suppress him. However, Murong-Yu felt that in front of the young man in embroidered clothes, Chang Tian was like an ant. It was not that Chang Tian was too weak. It was that the young man in embroidered clothes was too strong. Murong-Yu thought to himself. Although his strength had increased by a lot, he was not a match for the young man in embroidered clothes. Perhaps the young man in embroidered clothes could not kill him, but it was even more impossible for Murong-Yu to kill him. Because Murong-Yu had already controlled the saint's world, even if he did not extend his spiritual force, every single movement in the saint's world could not escape his eyes. Therefore, he saw the young man in embroidered clothes take a step forward after scanning the entire saint's world with his spiritual force and disappear on the spot. As for the young man's words, Murong-Yu heard every single word clearly. A star sphere. Sector Lord? Murong-Yu muttered to himself. That was not difficult to understand. The so-called planet should be the saint's world, and the saint's world was only a star sphere? Looking at the young man's disdain and disappointment, the saint's world was probably the lowest star sphere out of all the stars. This left Murong-Yu rather speechless. However, the young man's words made Murong-Yu's face sink. Right now, there was not a single person in the saint's world who had undergone reincarnation. In other words, the people of the saint's world could not leave the saint's world at all. However, the young man in embroidered clothes wanted to refine the entire saint's world. With the young man's strength and methods, Murong-Yu did not doubt that he could refine the saint's world at all. After all, a true ruler could refine the entire saint's world. However, if the young man in embroidered clothes refined the saint's world, all the people in the saint's world would be refined along with the saint's world. No one would be able to escape. Although Murong-Yu was not a saint, there were many people in the saint's world who were his family, friends, and even himself. Would he allow himself and his friends to be refined? That was impossible. Moreover, there were many people in the saint's world who had become Murong-Yu's believers. If there were no interactions, Murong-Yu would not care so much. After all, with so many people in the saint's world, how many could Murong-Yu save? However, Murong still wanted to save as many believers as he could while he was still capable of doing so. Moreover, the saint's world was his home. How could he let someone refine it? He had to stop the young man in embroidered clothes. If it did not work, he would directly kill him. Murong did not care about the other party's identity, even if he killed the young man in embroidered clothes. So what if he provoked the family behind him? Murong had an invincible heart. He was not afraid of any of that. However, although Murong wanted to stop the young man in embroidered clothes, he knew his limits. He did not have the ability to stop him at all, so he did not make a move. On the contrary, he concealed his aura and began to refine the sovereign soul artifact. He wanted to increase his strength in the shortest time possible. Only by increasing his strength would he have the ability to stop the young man in embroidered clothes. At this moment, the young man in embroidered clothes had already begun to move. He first set up a super large formation above the Qinghe mountain range. The formation was extremely complicated, but Murong still recognized it. It was a formation that assisted in refining. The young man in embroidered clothes was probably heavily injured and could not refine the entire saint's world directly. Therefore, he needed to use the formation to refine it. Murong was naturally happy to see this. The longer the young man in embroidered clothes refined the saint's world, the greater the chance of Murong stopping him. After setting up the formation above the Qinghe mountain range, the young man in embroidered clothes left the mountain range and set up a second formation in the distance. One formation after another was set up. The young man in embroidered clothes was not worried at all. This was because he knew that there was no existence in the saint's world that could threaten him. As for his enemies, they would not be able to find this place for at least 10,000 years. Even if his enemies found him 10,000 years later, he would have recovered his strength by then. It was even possible that he would have improved. However, what made Murong curious was that the resources the young man in embroidered clothes used to power the formation seemed to be many times more valuable than the highest grade saint bloodline. Even a small saint bloodline contained an extremely large amount of power. Even the weakest one was no weaker than a sovereign soul artifact. If this sovereign soul artifact can't help me break through to the sovereign realm, these resources are good stuff. Murong's eyes shone brightly. Although these things were set up in the formation, how could the formation stop Murong's footsteps? 108,000 formations. After the young man in embroidered clothes set up a total of 108,000 formations, he finally stopped. Murong was still refining the sovereign soul artifact and increasing his strength. There was still a long way to go before he reached the sovereign realm. It's finally done. As long as I refine this planet, not only will I be able to recover from my injuries, I'll even have some peace and quiet. The young man in embroidered clothes sat cross-legged in the air above the ninth heaven of the saint's world. A relieved smile appeared on his face. Formation, activate. After taking a deep breath, the young man in embroidered clothes' eyes flashed with a terrifying cold light. As he shouted in his heart, he waved his hands repeatedly. In the next moment, 108,000 streaks of light shot out from his hands and entered the formation he had set up earlier. At the same time, the 108,000 formations were activated. Immediately, a blinding light shot into the sky and enveloped the entire saint's world. Rumble. After a series of earth-shaking rumbles, the energy of the world in the saint's world surged wildly towards the formation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.